Hello, and welcome to the second annual 100 Black Men of America's National Collegiate 100 Conference. My name is Sydney Tompkins, and I'll be your MC. I serve as the Vice President for the Collegiate 100 of Georgia State University, and I cannot continue without thanking the 100 Black Men of America Incorporated and expressing how much they mean to myself and many of you. All of their efforts to build our community through mentorship are very appreciated. I would also like to thank our sponsors for today. Now, get ready for the welcome session to kick off the conference, presented to you by Thomas Dortch Jr., Chairman of the Board for the 100 Black Men of America Incorporated, Michael W. Victorian, Collegiate 100 Committee Chairman, James A. Duke, President of the 100 Black Men of Indianapolis Incorporated, Rashad Townsend, Collegiate 100 of Morehouse College President, and last but not least, Nigel Walton, Collegiate 100 of Georgia State University President.
Good afternoon, and welcome to the 2020 Virtual Collegiate 100 Conference. I'm Thomas W. Dortch Jr., Chairman of 100 Black Men of America Incorporated. This marks the second year we have collaborated with our 100 Black Men chapters and our collegiate scholars to deliver a national conference designed specifically for college students. Last year's inaugural event in Indianapolis was a huge success. We are excited to welcome each of you to today's conference themed A College Experience, the Formation of a New World. For those of you who joined us last year, welcome back. To everyone else, we are happy you have joined us this year. We are set to bring to you all of the sessions and the valuable content that Collegiate 100 students requested in a survey response. We ask, and you responded in a big way. Over the next 2 days, we are going to deliver. As we approach the end of a year that has been filled with unimaginable challenges, we are proud to report that our Collegiate 100 students have persevered with their goals in mind and focused, and we are proud of each and every one of you. Our sincere hope is that we will be together in person for 2021 for our Collegiate 100 Conference. So please stay safe, protect yourselves and your family by following the COVID-19 safety guidelines without exception. We need you healthy, and the world needs you here to fulfill your purpose. Coming up next is our welcome session, and joining me will be two phenomenal leaders from this great organization we call the 100 Black Men of America Incorporated. And joining them will be one of our Collegiate 100 presidents. We are all excited to kick off the conference and share an abundant amount of information with you. Our goal is simple: for you to be engaged, equipped, and empowered. So get comfortable and get ready for the experience. Get ready to gain a lot of knowledge, and together, let's form a new world. Let's go.
Welcome, Chairman Dortch. Good afternoon. I'm Michael W. Victorian, and am at the honor of serving as the 100 Black Men of America's Collegiate 100 Committee Chair. And with the support of the 100 Black Men of America Incorporated, our generous sponsors, our committed network of 100 Black Men chapters, and our dedicated Collegiate 100 advisors, allow me to welcome you to the 2020 Virtual Collegiate 100 Conference. Let me thank each and every one of you for not only registering, but thank you in advance for your full participation in the 6 sessions that will hopefully enlighten you in the areas of collegiate mental health, Black educational leadership, affecting your brand with resume writing and interviewing skills, strategies to promote social justice and equality throughout our communities, avoiding negative stereotypes in corporate America, options for investment in the stock market and banking, and last but certainly not least, on Saturday morning, our virtual job fair. The theme of our conference this year, A College Experience, the Formation of a New World, is most appropriate during these uncertain times, since you, our Collegiate 100 members, are the key formula for a new world. A world where there must be no pleasure without consciousness, no knowledge without character, no science without humanity, no commerce without morality, no worship without sacrifice, and no politics without principle. Please enjoy the conference, but above all, please stay safe. Protect yourselves and your loved ones by following the COVID-19 guidelines without exception. We're depending on you for a bright future. Now, I am pleased to continue our welcome with two dynamic individuals. First of all, Mr. James Duke, president of the 100 Black Men of Indianapolis Incorporated. And secondly, Mr. Rashad Langston Townsend, president of the Collegiate 100 of Morehouse College. Gentlemen, take it away.
Hello, everyone. Again, my name is James Duke, and I have the pleasure of serving as the president of the 100 Black Men of Indianapolis. And to my good friend Rashad here, a proud graduate of Morehouse College. I see Morehouse is representing. Welcome to the 2020 Virtual Collegiate 100 Conference. As Brother Victorian said, we are really looking forward to an exciting time. Obviously, we are doing this virtually as opposed to in person. But on behalf of the 100 Black Men of Indianapolis and our Collegiate 100 of Indianapolis, we welcome you to this conference. I'm also welcoming you on behalf of all of the 100 Black men presidents across our entire network. We want you to know as students, as leaders, as future leaders, that we are here to support you. We are here to provide our shoulders for you to stand on. We understand that having this engagement is important. This being the second year of our Collegiate 100 conference, we wanted to make sure that we are not only helping you be successful, but we are equipping you with the tools to be successful. Brother Victorian has already mentioned the layout of what the sessions are going to be for this conference. So I encourage you to take advantage of every session that you can. We have some dynamic presenters that are going to be on hand to provide you with some information to help you along your path. We, the 100 Black Men of America Network and International, we want to make sure that our future is secure. And we know that with you as our leaders, that our future is going to be in good hands. So enjoy this conference, enjoy the opportunity to network, fellowship, and learn as much as you can. And we look forward to you being a part of this organization in the future. Thanks. Have a great conference.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the 2020 Collegiate 100 Conference. My name is Rashad Langston Townsend, a junior economics major, Black Studies minor from Morehouse College, and I serve as the president of the Morehouse College chapter of Collegiate 100. On behalf of all of our chapters, I would like to thank Chairman Dortch, Mr. Victorian, my Morehouse brother, Mr. Duke, and the 100 Black Men of America for hosting this conference for us. We are so grateful for you all's continued support of us, even in this virtual environment. For me, this is a very special year. Some of you are probably aware with the Collegiate 100 of Atlanta, but not necessarily the Collegiate 100 of Morehouse College. This year is actually our inaugural year. The Collegiate 100 of Atlanta has now disbanded and is broken into three new chapters: Georgia State University, Oglethorpe University, and Morehouse College. Though I'm here representing Morehouse, I bring greetings from these two other chapters as well. It has undoubtedly been a tough year for everybody, but especially for us college students. Whether in person or remote, our experience has been altered and the end is not in sight. But I have been impressed with the innovation and resilience that I have seen from my collegiate brothers and sisters across the nation. Not only have you all persisted in being active campus leaders, but you continue to exemplify the importance of supporting one another through the toughest of times. It is commendable, and it shows the bond that we have through Collegiate is real and transcendent. My advice to everyone during this tough time is to give yourself grace and extend that grace to others as well. These are very unprecedented times that have taken away the lives that we are all accustomed to living. By just being here today, you are showing great strength and making a valuable investment into yourselves. Your strength shows adaptability that we will all need undoubtedly for our future endeavors in lives. Over the next few days, we will do a deep dive into topics such as mental health, Black leadership, social justice, and navigating corporate America. On top of this, we will gain valuable personal branding skills as well as learning to develop our financial portfolios. Finally, we will have the chance to network with some amazing companies to ensure that we are prepared to take the next step into our careers. I look forward to participating with you all in these sessions and picking up all the gems that are being dropped. So thank you all for tuning in today and enjoy the conference.
And now, let us welcome for our invocation, the president of the Georgia State Perimeter Campus, Mr. Nigel Walton, who will bring us the invocation.
Lord God, thank you so much for this day, and I thank you for this conference that we call the Collegiate 100 National Conference. Lord God, I thank you so much for every leader, every advisor who was a part of the great mission of serving African American youth. Lord, I pray from this conference that what we do not have, would you give us? What we do not know, would you teach us? And what we are not, would you make us for your glory and through your word? Father, I pray that we have fruitful conversations. Lord, I pray that you would give us ideas that could only come from you. Lord, would you bless this conference? Lord, we may not be gathered in a place, but I know from your word where 2 or 3 are gathered, you are there. So, Lord, would you be here? We pray all these things in the name of Jesus. Amen.
Next, we will have Terrell Stafford, Collegiate 100 President of Texas Southern University, to introduce our first workshop for today, Addressing Collegiate Mental Health Amid the COVID-19 Pandemic.
Greetings, my name is Terrell Stafford, the president of Collegiate 100, seated on the campus of Texas Southern University. You know, as a student who's accustomed to being on campus, as a non-traditional student, I've had to go from adjusting to being, on campus to dramatically being pushed to an online setting to starting an entire semester online. And I can tell you that it's very stressful, very strenuous, a lot of adjustments as it pertains to organizing my calendar, organizing my meetings with my members, and trying to still do the work of the organization, and just juggling all of the different responsibilities that I have. As we go forward with this pandemic, we just have to remember that there are different things that we can do. One thing that I do personally to kind of help deal with the added stress from the COVID environment, I like working out. I like playing, my video game. I like, from time to time I may watch anime, YouTube, whatever the case may be. I try to block out, everything that helps added stress when possible, of course. And as a TSU with the leadership is going on and what they're doing, and they're making technology more available, way more available than ever, and just continue to adjust with the times and evolve technologically, and I think that's helping kind of alleviate some of the stress off of some of the students. It's our responsibility as student leaders to identify disparities for students around us who are probably going through the exact same thing as us, and utilizing mental health professionals on campus, whether it be your health center, whether it be your personal physician who recommends it, whether it be your parents, or whether it be your Collegiate 100 chapter. And on behalf of our members at the Texas Southern University chapter, we would like to thank 100 Black Men of America for putting together this amazing opportunity of this National Collegiate 100 Conference.
Welcome to the 100 Black Men 2020 Virtual Conference 100 Conference Session. This is the Collegiate Experience, the Formation of a New World. I am your moderator, Stephanie Johnson, the Executive Director of the Lee Thompson Young Foundation based in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm also a behavioral health consultant at NaviSite LLC. Today's conference is going to start with a power forum called Addressing Collegiate Mental Health Amid COVID-19 Pandemic. Today, our panelists are Dr. Eric Griggs, Director of Community Medicine at Access Health, Louisiana. Dr. B. Nalaja Green, Clinical Psychologist at the Atlanta Department of Veteran Affairs and owner of Standpoint Therapy and Organizational Consulting, Incorporated. We also have with us Ms. Nia Jones, social worker and consultant, Black Mental Health Alliance for Education and Consultation, Incorporated. And finally, and please help me with this if I make a mistake, Dr. Lakelisha Izzard, is that correct? All right, thank you. And she is a licensed professional counselor and owner of Shekinah Counseling and founding member of and immediate past president of the American Counseling Association of Georgia. Welcome, everyone, and thank you all for joining us for this forum. All right, so this particular conference, Power Forum, is especially for college students going back to campus and starting their college school year amidst the COVID-19 pandemic. They have experienced unique challenges from last year, ending the semester, or in high school, or starting the semester this year virtually or on campus with a whole lot of different situations on their campus. So before the pandemic started, 1 in 5 college students experienced one or more undiagnosable mental disorders worldwide. The fact that the COVID-19 pandemic affects collegiate mental health underscores the urgent need to understand these challenges and concerns. So during this session, we're going to ask some questions to our panelists to gain more insight about these things. Is everybody ready to go? All right, so the first big question that we have for you guys today, so take a deep breath and get ready to answer. For the college students watching today, please describe in your own words your definition of mental health. We'll start with you, Dr. Griggs.
Making sure I'm unmuted. Good morning, and thank you for inviting me to this panel. That's a great question. One of the distinguishing things that needs to be made is the difference between mental health and mental illness. And I know you can't have a conversation about mental issues without stigma coming up, so I'm sure we'll touch it later. Mental health is the same as physical health. It needs to be thought about. It needs to be considered, and it needs to be taken into consideration for everything it is that's happening. In light of having our current COVID-19 pandemic, there is potentially a mental health pandemic that's taking place. So mental health is what it takes for you to be your happiest and to be your best. And it's the small things that are tied to your interpretation of your experiences in your environment and your perception of them, and keeping them within the box of control and contentedness with understanding of what's going on around you. I said all that to say those are a lot of big words to say mental health is having your mind right and being in a good state, keeping your mind right and staying on path.
Thank you, Dr. Griggs. Dr. Green.
Thank you for having me, and I appreciate the distinction that Dr. Griggs just made between mental health and mental illness, because I don't think that distinction is always made. So when I think about mental health, I think about mental health as a state of balanced well-being between multiple areas of your life. And so that includes your ability to manage your emotions well, having a stable way of thinking, having good physical health, being able to form and maintain healthy relationships, having a sense of meaningfulness in the world and what you're doing, that you are connected to your activities and connected to the communities of which you are a part. Also being able to live in alignment with your values, which means having a sense of who you are and what your values are and what's important to you, and being able to line your life up in a conscious way so that your life is reflective of those values that are most guiding you in your path.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Green. Ms. Jones.
Sure. Thank you, everyone, for your input. And I'm so excited to be here today. And so when I tell clients or students my definition of mental health, it really goes in line with kind of like the textbook definition, which I always describe as it's kind of what our parents or grandparents or whoever cared for you really wants for you. And that's really, 4 things: that you can realize your own abilities. And so as a clinician, sitting with clients and being able to help them to realize, those great things about you, and really being able to pull those out and to understand them, realize them, walk in them, being able to cope with the normal stresses of life. I tell everybody who will listen that life will life on you, right? And so being able to cope through that is how you're able to, process through and make it through, because things are bound to happen. You're able to work productively and fruitfully. And so we know that mental health costs us millions of dollars in productivity at work, as well as at school. And so being able to actually complete assignments and not only be busy, but be productive. And lastly, being able to make a positive contribution to your community. And so being able to give back, or, the work that you do, it fills you up with such passion and drive that you're able to not only work productively and fruitfully, but also make a contribution to your community. And so when I think about, as a parent, or, even as someone's daughter, that's what she wanted for me. And so that's when I describe it in that way to my clients. That's the ultimate state of well-being. When we think about mental health, we all have mental health. And so being able to take care of it in this way is my own definition and interpretation.
Thank you. And Dr. Izzard?
Thank you. And yes, I am so excited to be here today. But just like all of the other panelists have said, as it relates to mental health, I think so many times mental health gets a negative view when we hear the term mental health. But it is just like the other panelists said, it is about literally taking care of our mind, taking care of our whole self. And as a mental health professional, as a professor, and also as a professional trainer, whenever I educate people about mental health, one of the main things I try to let them know is that it's a state where your mind is healthy enough that it has coping ability and able to balance the challenges that life so often bring us. And so that's the key place that I like to stay whenever I'm talking about mental health, is that we know that that state of mind is a place where we can have healthy coping ability to deal with the challenges that life brings. So it gives us a balanced mind to keep us functioning and not operating in dysfunction.
Thank you, Dr. Izzard. Okay, let's move on to the second question. This one is for you, Dr. Green. What are some reasons that you believe or you have experienced that stigma exists towards seeking mental health help?
So I think that there are some kind of barriers regarding stigma in the larger kind of cultural discourse, but then there are also some that are specific to the Black community. And so within kind of the larger cultural discourse, I don't think we have a lot of good images of people who are living with mental illness, who are living in recovery from mental illness and having lives that are productive and connected and balanced in the ways that the other panelists have talked about. And so I think there's often a separation between these are the people who are mentally ill and these are the people who are mentally well. And there's not an understanding that there's a continuum, that all of us fall in different places along the continuum throughout our lives, depending on what our experiences are, depending on where we just are kind of mentally, psychologically, and emotionally. So I think we need to have better images and better examples of what living a life along the continuum of mental wellness or mental illness looks like. I think in the Black community in particular, we have these narratives of individualism and strength really being about being able to handle it, whatever it is. I can handle the work, I can handle the family responsibilities, I can handle the relationships and the friendships and the organizations and the clubs I'm a part of. And sometimes therapy is seen as an admission of weakness, an admission that maybe I can't handle it. Maybe I actually don't have as much control over myself, over my emotions, over my life as I thought I did. And so there's that inner judgment that then impacts whether or not a person feels ready or willing to come into therapy. And so I think this cultural narrative can be really harmful for us in many ways, because it can prevent us from recognizing the real value of relying on both informal and formal support systems for our mental wellness. And also, as Dr. Griggs earlier stated, the difference between mental health and mental illness. Mental illness is really about a diagnosable condition, that your life is at such a place that You are not functioning in a way that is productive or healthy for you. And that time period is a time period where professional and more formal help might be more effective than some of the more informal systems that we rely on. So in terms of stigma, just to kind of make it plain, really being able to understand that seeking help is not weakness. It is not an admission of loss of control. It is not a statement on your character in any negative way. In fact, it is you responding to what your needs are and going to the place where you believe can meet those needs.
Very well answered. Thank you so much, Dr. Green. Our next question. What are some barriers to mental health care, and how can college students overcome these barriers? Dr. Izzard?
Absolutely. This is one that I definitely see often as a mental health professional as well as a professor. But some of the things that really stand out to me as it relates to what some of these barriers are is number one, low socioeconomic status. That's one of the key things that I have found to be some of the challenging areas too, as it relates to receiving services. Because within these areas, again, there's a lack of knowledge, there's a lack of awareness, and then many times there's a lack of insurance and different things that can assist our students with being able to get the services and get the resources that they need. One of the other areas that really stands out to me as it relates to barriers to mental health care is it goes back to, again, the stigma, the negative attitudes and beliefs. And when we're dealing with young people, again, that lack of awareness and that lack of knowledge can many times build up that wall of stigma for them, which is a barrier to their own mental health care. And again, not understanding exactly what mental health, what mental illness really is. And then that goes back to culture, and then looking at that particular individual's culture and what they've learned as they were being reared. I think about even my own household. You know, when I was being reared, I am the only mental health professional in my family, as well as first generation female graduate. So again, there was just so many things that my family did not understand about mental health and mental illness that I didn't receive until I became educated. And so it was common in my family to hear, oh, you know, well, we don't need to go and see a counselor. You know, going to see counselors or for another culture group. So hearing things like this, I believe, too, can be a barrier when that young person is being reared. So again, they don't understand as to why they should seek mental health care. Also, some of the other things that you can look at as it relates to barriers are perceived ineffectiveness of treatment. Some may have tried it and felt like it wasn't beneficial for them. That could have been due to a lack of cultural competence, sometimes on that particular counselor, especially if they're working with a college student of color. And then also just other problems as it relates to understanding resources, understanding mentoring programs, understanding programs like NAMI, peer support that are out there. And so those are just some common barriers that I've seen. When it looks at overcoming these barriers and how students can overcome these barriers, I think number one is access. Access, whether it's on the college campus, so campus counseling clinics, also support to help them understand what treatment actually is and how effective it can be, and then also peer student support groups. I really believe that students getting together and talking about some of these challenges helps to remove some of the stigma, and that in turn can help them overcome some of these barriers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Izzard. Wonderful way of answering that question. You hit all the good points there. This next question is for you, Ms. Jones. According to the University of Michigan Counseling and Psychological Services, quote unquote, the COVID-19 pandemic has resulted in increased loneliness, stress, anxiety, and depression among all Americans, including, of course, college students. What kind of coping strategies do you recommend for college students at this time?
Sure. Well, I got a good question. And so the first thing that popped into my mind was at the beginning of the pandemic, I kind of reimagined what my practice would look like. And so I just kind of went full transparency with, Dr. Marsha Linehan, the founder of DBT, which is a practice model, talks about how I am one of you. And so I use that transparency with all of my clients, kind of explaining to them, when I was in college, high school, middle school, I experienced and still to this day live with depression and anxiety. And so in that transparency, I was able to, grow my practice, but also be able to really identify with the individuals that I work with. And so being honest with yourself is a big coping strategy, right? So being honest about where you are, honest about, this is a pandemic, right? And it's something that most people, if not all people that are alive right now, have never seen before. And so in that, the strategies have to work for you. And you have to do them unapologetically, right? And so we can talk about journaling and, turning your music up real loud and, having some aromatherapy, but really being intentional about doing them unapologetically and leading toward kind of this radical self-care. So a couple of strategies that I always tell, college students and a lot of my clients that I work with and other students, journaling is super powerful. And so whether that is, you set a timer for a certain amount of minutes. There was a study that if you set a timer for 3 minutes and just kind of free write your thoughts, you haven't even begun to unlock all of the thoughts that have passed through your mind. But it's a start, and you're starting to get those things out onto paper so that they no longer live up here. But the biggest coping skill, and I have a whole list, is really giving yourself some grace. This is, again, something that we've never experienced before. And, it doesn't even hold a candle to when I was in college, we were, going into a recession. And so all of us were like scrambling, like, oh my God, where are we going to work? This is totally different. Internships have been canceled, and, homecomings have been canceled. And so we're grieving those things that we've lost, and rightfully so. So give yourself grace and space to grieve those missed or lost opportunities, but also not feeling like you have to replace everything with a virtual experience. It's okay to rest, and giving yourself the space and time to be able to do that. Also, another coping skill sometimes is turning off social media. It is full of what I call toxic positivity, right? At the beginning of the pandemic, people were talking about, oh, if you don't exit this pandemic with a brand new business venture and a book and all kinds of stuff, that you didn't lack time, you lacked discipline. When it's that can weigh on add more stress to you and anxiety to you than anything else ever could, because you're being hard on yourself because of something that you're continually seeing as you're scrolling on social media. And so sometimes being very intentional about taking a break from Instagram or from TikTok, or I know they talk about now that Facebook is for old people, but really being intentional about taking a break from that, because you don't need that extra stress in your life. And some people are gallivanting in Mexico and vacationing without a mask on, right? And that may not be your reality right now, and being okay with that. And so really journaling, practicing radical self-care that works for you, giving yourself some grace, removing yourself from, the toxic positivity, and doing it unapologetically. And if you're finding that those coping strategies aren't working on your own, accessing portals such as Therapy for Black Girls, or even the Black Mental Health Alliance, to be able to get connected with a therapist can be your next step.
Wonderful points. Thank you so much for hitting all those great points, Ms. Jones. My next question is for you, Dr. Griggs. There are many college students who are afraid of going back to school and going back to campus, and parents who are also afraid during this pandemic. What advice can you provide to help these students and parents ease their minds, and what kind of ways should they take precautions?
Well, the first thing that they need to do, parents and students alike, is to acknowledge that feeling and understand that right now, especially, it's okay not to be okay. We're living in very uncertain times, and it's fine. The first step is admitting that there is something wrong, and then I'm glad you brought it up in that context. Parents and kids, talk about it as a family. Talk through all of the emotions and the feelings about it. And then once you do that, you take your time, you breathe, you check, you step back to make sure everyone's okay, then start planning. And when you're flailing in the storm of unknown COVID and unknown college experiences, the anchors that you can create for yourself happen to be A, your family support, B, plans and action plans, and have an idea of what would take place. If I'm going to go to school, what can I expect? And being very real about your expectations so you can make patterns for yourself. Patterns provide stability and they allay anxiety. Again, acknowledging that we're not okay right now. And it's funny how when people go through traumatic experiences together, it can tend to bond them. And it also creates one of those anchors and a safe space to talk about what you're uncomfortable with. The decision whether or not to go back to an actual real in-person environment versus the virtual environment. Talking about comparing and contrasting experiences with parents. What did you do when this happened? You didn't have anything like this happen, but how did you cope? What can we do now? So the biggest thing is dialogue, communication. The other thing is taking a self-survey and a self-inventory every day. My advice, when I do talk to people, not just college kids, I ask people to breathe, check, and step back. And I've been doing it every day, literally every day, on the air to thousands, if not millions of people. I want you to take a deep breath, breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out, and imagine yourself letting all of your anxiety and stress go. You can do this as a family. And then I want you to check. I want you to take a self-survey, check yourself, check your family members, check the camera if you're looking to make sure that person okay, and ask those questions. Hey, how are you sleeping? How am I sleeping? How's my appetite? Am I losing interest in things that normally fascinate me and intrigue me and that I enjoy doing? And if so, talk about it. And if you find yourself unable to not focus, or the word is perseverating, just focusing in a negative way on any of these things, or they seem out of order, it's okay. Understand that in spite of the stigmas that we've been told that have been passed down through the generations of our families, it's okay to talk to someone. If you can't talk with your core, your anchor family, and it gets beyond that, or be ready to accept any of the observations in a helpful way, in a constructive way, that you might need to go talk to someone. Find a therapist, find a psychologist, find someone to help talk you through these tough times. And then the last step, that's breathe, check, step back into the real world, flush away all of the worries and anxieties and anything bad that happened the previous day, and realize you're starting with a clean slate, open to dialogue, open to new experiences, with the comfort knowing that you have that anchor, at least that one anchor, that family that you can talk to, or peer group, your bubble. We're making bubbles now, right? That you feel comfortable speaking with.
Right. Thank you. Very, very, very good points. And last question that we have pre-written. For college students who are or who may think that the elderly or certain groups that are kind of predisposed to negative effects of COVID-19, Dr. Griggs, what advice would you give college students who have that notion? You're muted, sir.
I just gave you, if that's what they think, I gave them their first F. If they never got an F, you're absolutely wrong. That is F for fallacy, false. That ain't right. If any of them folks told you that, walk away from them. That is absolutely not true. This virus does not care. It does not discriminate. At first, when COVID busted out on the scene, it was in the elderly, we thought. Only in the elderly. So the elderly, we put them up and they got safe. And then it realized that the virus is going to do what the virus does. The virus is going to spread to any human being possible that will allow it to get into our human party. The virus doesn't spread the virus, people spread the virus. And just because you might be between 18 and 21, you could be 21, 31, 41, 51, you could be 1. It doesn't matter. The virus, you're susceptible to the virus, and you can spread it to other people. And let me be very clear. There's a thing called asymptomatic, meaning that you might be infected and you don't show any symptoms. Not even a sneeze, a cough, anything, but you're still infected. Just because you're asymptomatic, just because you feel well, doesn't mean your body is well. It doesn't mean that the damage isn't being done to your body on the inside. We know this virus started as a respiratory thing, but now it affects multiple organ systems, particularly the circulatory system, which is causing young people even to have strokes, heart attacks, and potentially 6 months down the line, potentially this thing called myocarditis, meaning that the damage from the blood vessels can be such to an extent that it leaves scar tissue. And you could be running, exercising, you could be a college athlete, and 6 months from now, you could drop dead because of the scar tissue could stop your heart. So yes,
Yeah.
so just Dr. Griggs gave y'all your first F.
But thank you. Hopefully they'll be able to make up for it. There's a makeup.
Right. Yeah.
Change your thoughts. All right. So now that we're done with those questions, I have a couple of my own. You ready? Good. All right. So I know we touched on some of the kind of what I tend to think are when we have discussions about mental health, especially during a pandemic, we tend to err on the side of kind of the negative. You know, these are the things that are happening as relates to stigma and all of these things. But I'd like to also always have to bring in kind of the positive side of this. And one of the things that some studies, early studies, are showing is that corporations have decided that they're not going back to in-person. Many of them are keeping with a virtual type of workplace. Some colleges are also considering this. And in that frame of thought, I'm curious what you all think about the positives that have come out of this pandemic. What are some things that have that you all have noticed, observed, and even experienced for yourselves that have been positives for your mental health? I'll start with, we'll go down the line. Dr. Griggs?
One of the big things that I started doing was I started running, believe it or not, and I had to be careful with it. I took off like Forrest Gump when this thing first happened. And I just started running and ended up losing like 25 to 30 pounds to the point that people thought I was sick. But I started doing audiobooks and I have to start running again. I will honestly tell you, full disclosure, I got shook. It started in March and started running. And then we had the shooting of Ahmaud Arbery. And typically I've been pretty good at avoiding watching traumatic things happen. And I caught it on a clip. And I was running at 4 or 5 in the morning and it shook me. So I had a PTSD, actually. So what did I start doing? I started talking to folks about it, my friends, my peer groups, and I started walking, carving out that time for myself just to do nothing and to be and to listen to audiobooks.
Yes, I agree with you there. Let's see, Dr. Green?
One of the things that we talked about earlier was barriers to mental health care. And I think one of the things that COVID has done is create actually more accessibility for people who may have resource barriers, right? Like transportation, for example. So there are so many more people, I think, that have access to mental health care and even insurance plans that have covered copays for telehealth. So certainly kind of broadening access, I think, is something that has happened just from a professional standpoint. From a personal standpoint, I think the pandemic has really caused me to step back and slow down. I generally have a very busy life, and I don't always kind of make concessions for stillness. And I think that being in a place where we can't be as busy as we normally are, that has actually allowed me to get outside more. I was walking in my neighborhood, a neighborhood that I lived in for years and had never walked around. I got to meet some of my neighbors. I actually became more involved at a local level in some of the work that we're doing around kind of culture shift and culture change in terms of equity. And all of these things came about because I was actually spending more time at home in my community, getting to know my neighbors. And so while there has been so much disconnection because we're not as social as we used to be, I also found this surprising space of connection that had been present, but I had not accessed before because I had been so busy being outside of my community, working and doing other things.
Great. Awesome. Ms. Jones?
I think professionally, professionally and personally, I think they're kind of married for me in that at the beginning of the pandemic, I was struggling. Again, as I said earlier, I'm one of you. And so it has been it was really hard to like figure out like what the heck is going on, right? And so it caused me to activate all of those coping skills that I had taught myself over the years in my own healing process. With the activation of those coping skills, I was able to really create ways of being and ways of practicing and things that would also help my clients. And so it's really helped me to do the things that were helpful for me, but also for them. And so that's a lot of creativity, using different excerpts from books, binge watching girlfriends, using that in my practice that is 99% Black women and girls. And so in that time, I used to be a traveling therapist. So I would go into people's homes. And so there was no time to be able to create something that would work. And being home in front of the camera, although it's difficult and had to get new glasses, it has been helpful in that I kind of take a step back, work on me, like really practicing radical self-care, doing it unapologetically, but also being able to take some new ways of being and apply that to the mental health space.
Wonderful. And Dr. Izzard?
Absolutely. I love what everyone has said. And I love, Ms. Jones, how you say unapologetically as it relates to self-care, being intentional about our self-care. So for me personally, I'm an introvert. So when everything, of course, happened for me, I was able to go into this inner zone because as an introvert, I gained strength from my inner self. So I actually became even more creative and more innovative as an entrepreneur and looking at my virtual services. So that has actually been a tremendous blessing for me on that side. But also personally, I'm a gym guru. I love the gym and I have always gone to the gym at least 4 to 5 days a week. But of course, with COVID hitting, it was just unsafe. And then many of the gyms, they were closing. So again, those nature walks, and I call mine faith-based walks because I'm a woman of great faith. So taking those nature and faith-based walks every day in the beautiful sunlight, that truly did just miraculous things for me mentally as well as emotionally. And so that became a part of my everyday routine. And I made sure to schedule that in every day after I saw my clients or whatever other services I did for that day. So that became a blessing and a benefit. And then looking at it professionally wise, during my term as president for the American Counseling Association of Georgia, I realized that peer support was really needed. And especially among us as practitioners, that we need to talk about the change and the different things that were going on, changing to telemental health versus face-to-face. And so that became an amazing outlet for the counselor. So again, like you said, positivity can absolutely come out of it. We just have to get focused on what those positive things can be.
Awesome. That's a great segue to my next question for you guys. My next question is for college students that are watching, what protective factors, what positive things should they look for in themselves that have come up or could possibly grow out of this time of adaptation, adjustment, and great transition? Dr. Griggs?
So it's an interesting question. I read a story yesterday about talents and gifts, and there was a young lady who took up the piano, and she liked playing the piano. And her dad was like, she was horrible at it, but she liked practicing the piano. And her dad was like, you should take up tennis. You're a much better athlete than you are a tennis player. A piano player. And she told her dad as a child, but I'm doing this for me and I like it. So now's the time to look for the positive things. We're so quick to be hard on ourselves, especially as these college students. I mean, we are all overachievers and we're never good enough and we could always do better. And all the things that might be distractions or not positively looked upon socially are things to just put to the side. Well, but that's who you are. So focus on who you are. When I talk to the college students in the morning, well, it's people in general, particularly my students, when you wake up in the morning, you wash your face, I want you to look yourselves in the eye and smile, and know that you're okay and that you're amazing. So now's the time for no one else, just your own, to take those gifts, those weird, quirky things that you think people would hate you for, or those things are the ones that you nurture. Play the piano as horribly as you possibly can to the best of your ability and enjoy every bit. My roommate in college sang all the time, especially when he vacuumed, to the point that we would end up wrestling because I don't care how it sounds to anybody else. I just want to sing a song. To this day, you know what I'm thinking about it now? He's a doctor. I'm a doctor. It's 30 years later. I'm still mad at that dude. I can hear
him. Breathe.
Step
back. Or relax, relate, release, for those of you who know.
Peer support, folks. Peer support. College kids. Y'all saw how they did that?
Yes. Yes. All right. Dr. Green, what would you say are some positive protective factor type things that college students should look for in themselves that have come out of this transition?
I really agree with this revival of creativity and having a sense of curiosity, being able to reimagine what your life kind of looks like and how creativity can be a part of that. Being creative, even if you're not particularly good at the thing you're being creative about, right? Like, for example, I love painting. I'm terrible at painting. I cannot draw a straight line, but I enjoy the process of sitting with paints and watching something happen on a canvas, even if no one else gets to see it. So really allowing yourself to be curious about what you can learn, what you can do. I've heard of some folks who have started to study languages during this time because now there's space to do that. I'm always discovering new music. I'm a fan of kind of NPR Tiny Desk concerts. And so there's always kind of a new artist that's coming along. So really being able to broaden your knowledge base and kind of broaden your world even through this time.
Thank you. Ms. Jones?
Yeah, ditto to what everyone else has said. I think, if this had happened even 10 years ago, we wouldn't have the kind of space and opportunity given all the technological advances that we have. And so, yeah, explore, and really look inward. I think a lot of times, especially when I was in college, we didn't really look inward until something happened, right? Like, absolutely. I lost a scholarship, or, this friend who I met on the first day and we called each other family. 6 months down the road, we're no longer family. And now, we've fallen out. Now I'm looking at myself, right? And there's no bad, internal thing that's happening, but you can still turn inward because you have the time to, right? So unfortunately, you're not at the cafeteria hanging out, which is where I spent a lot of my time. But you're able to really turn in and do this work. And there's like so many different platforms, Teachable, Udemy. TikTok is even teaching people how to do different things. And so taking that time to explore and to grow, but also being able to turn inward and know who you are. I found out in the pandemic that I'm a full-on nerd, right? And I'm okay with that. Lots of Star Wars, and it's a thing. So I'm in good company, apparently.
The transparency is flawless. Love it. And very much agree with all of the above. And yes, Dr. Izzard.
I believe Dr. Greg's other calling is comedian. But moving forward, you all said some amazing things. The only other thing I would add, my adolescent clients that I see, I have been picking their brains with getting them to start thinking about purpose in life, getting them to really do some intentional goal setting as it relates to their future and what that looks like, even getting them to start thinking about the law of attraction and how it's actually working in their life currently. And I have just seen their brains grow as a result of that. But I wish that's something that someone would have taught me at an early age. Of course, I've been very blessed in my track and going through my education throughout my 20s and finishing my doctorate in my early 30s. But when it comes to purpose, many times I don't think we really start thinking about that until we're probably in our mid 30s to 40s. So I think it's something that definitely our college students could benefit from during this time, is taking some time to journal and focus on what those future long-term goals may look like for them, and start looking at how the law of attraction can start to work in their life now to get them on that path to purpose.
Thank you. For this one, I'm just going to add a quick little note to what you all have already said. One of the things that I learned from my high school students when I was instructing virtually was that they were becoming more independent. You know, they weren't waiting for their parents to wake up and cook for them. They were doing their chores more. They were being creative. They were doing things like riding bikes in their neighborhood, which they'd never done before, high school students. So this is a time where, and not only that, they were actually paying more attention to their mental health and how they were doing, and noticing when their sleep was off and their appetite was strange, and they were getting so bored they didn't know what to do with themselves, and and putting limitations on their social media intake. And so I think this is one generation that can say they grew up in a mental health revolution, where they were exposed to what it really means to practice mental health from a young age all the way up, without as many barriers as some of us may have, at a larger scale. And so I applaud those who are taking the time to use this pandemic in that way for themselves to grow, pay attention to things that maybe their parents or grandparents never had a chance to be exposed to, and really trusting their own independence and self-resilience coming out of this. So this is the end of the question part. So now we will go around for everyone to take 1 minute for your closing remarks. We'll start with you, Dr. Griggs.
So I'll go back to what I said, folks. This is I want everyone to take a minute every day. Take a minute to breathe, check, step back. You got to see it work first hand rather, and the full brunt of it. When you saw my peers calm me down from being dramatically stressed, thinking about my roommate singing at the top of his lungs while vacuuming. This is a time for reflection. Things happen for a reason, and now it's actually a beautiful time to really strengthen the relationships with your family and the people around you, but more importantly with yourself. Use this time as a time of self-discovery, and taking a personal inventory part of your daily routine, so you can assure that your mental health matches your physical health.
Thanks so much. Dr. Green?
So I, in my full-time work, I'm a trauma specialist, and I spend a lot of time talking with people who have survived unimaginable things. And I like to remind them that you are your best thing. You are greater than the circumstances that you're in, including the circumstance of a pandemic. Your life is a dynamic creation that you are always forming. And when we bring conscious intention to the life that we are living, we really can create a life that is in line with our highest good and our best self. And so be intentional as you take your time daily, right, to reflect on your emotional well-being and who you are. Also take time to set intentions about what you want your day to be like, what you want your week to be like, how you want to be in relationship to others and also yourself. And remember that you are your greatest resource.
Thanks, Dr. Green. Ms. Jones?
Yeah, at the Black Mental Health Alliance, we always end our work with youth and with young adults with a love letter to Black young people. And so it always starts with Dear Young Black Mind. And so I figured I'd do that today. And so, Dear Young Black Mind, your mental health is essential work, and being prideful in who you are is mental health. And so, loving yourself unapologetically, all the melanin in your skin and the way in which your hair curls or doesn't curl, because you can, flat iron it if you choose to, or have a one. And so just being unapologetically you. In the midst of all of this, and taking care of your mental health is number one. Everything else comes second.
Thank you. And of course, last but not least, Dr. Izzard.
Absolutely. Everybody again said amazing things. And I'm just going to piggyback off of what they've said. When it comes to self-care, it must be intentional. And I'll end with a quote by Audre Lorde. She says that self-care is not about self-indulgence, but it is about self-preservation. And what that means is that self-care is essential to our survival. So again, don't ever apologize or feel bad about taking care of you first, because the truth of the matter is, how can you effectively help or take care of anyone else if you are not in the right state of mind and right state of health?
Powerfully said, all. Thank you so much for your input, your insight, your love for what you do, because it definitely beams through in the way you answer and the way you think about approaching these questions and the work that you do. I would also like to add that for those watching, please take time to find resources on your campuses. Take time to research for all organizations that are related to collegiate mental health practice and wellness. There are organizations such as Active Minds that specializes in mental health education, awareness, and advocacy specifically for the college population. That's just one. There's so many organizations out there, and they are looking for people to be involved. So one way to take care of yourself is educating yourself. Be mindful of the health side as well as the illness side. Pay attention to those around you. Be willing to talk about the difficult things when they come up. Be willing to go out with someone support while going to an appointment for the first time. Be willing to ask for help, knowing that asking for help is only the first step in taking care of yourself. It is also an ultimate use of self-love. When you reach out for help, you're actually getting the support you need from your community and those who are specifically designed and gifted to help and heal in the ways that you might need. So never think bad about it. Never think that it's something beneath you or it makes you weak. It is something that we are all given as a tool. We all have our own special gifts. There are some who will build and there are some who will counsel. Be mindful that it is all of these gifts that we use as humans to make our lives fulfilled, satisfied, and gratifying. So please take time to explore, be curious, be mindful, take care of yourselves and take care of each other. If we were doing that more often, we would actually be practicing mental health all the time. I have been your moderator for this powerful forum for mental health for the 100 Black Men of America 2020 Virtual Collegiate 100 Conference. I hope that you all have a wonderful rest of your conference and day. Thank you very much for having me. As a part of today's program, I would like to thank our sponsors for offering what you have to this particular conference, and for the 100 Black Men of America Incorporated as well. Thank you.
Now here to introduce our second session, Black Educational Leadership, is Malik Poindexter, Collegiate 100 President of FAMU.
Greetings, I am Malik Poindexter, a third-year business administration student from Atlanta, Georgia. Currently, I serve as the president of the FAMU chapter of Collegiate 100. In this panel, today we'll be talking about Black educational leadership. In the past, leaders like Booker T. Washington were at the forefront of Black education. Today, that role has been adopted by white women. In this panel today, we will learn how to not only take back the role, but to encourage young Black children to take their academics in the classroom seriously.
Greetings, I'm Emery Edwards, and I'm the Outreach Director here at EdChoice. EdChoice is a national nonpartisan organization committed to ensuring every family has the freedom to attend whatever educational option that works best for them. We're excited to partner again with 100 Black Men of America for your Collegiate 100 Next Gen Conference. We've put together a great panel for you entitled Black Educational Leadership, and our panelists will explore the history of Black-led schools and HBCUs and discuss how we can actually move this legacy forward by creating new leadership opportunities for this current generation. So I invite you to sit back and enjoy.
Alrighty, greetings, good people. My name is Mimi Johannes, and I serve as the Special Projects and Community Manager at the 74. We are a national K-12 education media organization. I have the honor and privilege to moderate this breakout session entitled Black Educational Leadership, Knowing Our History to Pass the Baton to the Next Generation. Black and brown students have rarely been provided a quality education in our country, and our country's history clearly demonstrates that marginalized communities have consistently been forced to rely upon themselves to provide an adequate education to as many students as possible. Author James Anderson's book, Education of Blacks in the South from 1860 to 1935, succinctly lays out how Black communities consistently had to provide their own schools by taxing themselves and fundraising within their own communities, as white officials never appropriated public money equitable by race. As a result, Black civic leaders established schools controlled by the community, and these community-controlled schools were administered by African Americans, taught by African Americans, and attended by African Americans. These schools and their founders left behind a powerful legacy, educating some of the most prominent Black intellectuals, civic leaders, and change agents. In this panel, we will discuss how we can learn from our legacy of educational leadership to encourage future generations to pick up the baton to improve the education of Black and brown students across the country. Joining me in today's discussion are three phenomenal leaders who embody Black excellence and educational leadership. I would love it if each of you could start by providing us with a brief overview of you and your background, 1 to 2 minutes at the most. And let's go ahead and get started with Naomi, please.
Thank you so much, Mimi, and I'm so excited to be on this panel today. Of course, my illustrious panel mates, Sekou and Curtis, are friends in the work, but also committed to HBCUs in the same ways that I am. I am currently the Director of Community Engagement for the KIP Foundation. KIP runs and has a network of 255 schools throughout the country. That work is really rooted in making sure that the ways that we show up in individual communities is showing up in the best ways for Black and brown students. The work that I am leading is brand new to the organization, but really finding ways to connect dots between organizations that support the students and families we serve, and making sure that we're being respectful thought partners in that work. Prior to, and I guess in succinct, at the same time, I'm also an authorizer for charter schools here in the District of Columbia with the District of Columbia Public Charter School Board. I was appointed to that role in early 2018, so have an extensive understanding of the charter landscape here in DC, but of course across the country. That work is also rooted in my previous role, which Sekou and I worked together as we built out the K-12 advocacy platform for UNCF. So I'm so excited to have this conversation and to be thoughtful around how we talk about Black education.
Thank you again for being here. Curtis, let's take it over to you.
Thank you. Like Naomi, really honored to be a part of this great panel. My name is Curtis Valentine. I wear many hats, one being the Deputy Director of the Reinventing America Schools Project at the Progressive Policy Institute. I'm also a member of the Board of Education, where I live here in suburban Maryland, Prince George's County, the 17th largest district in the country. I've been on the school board for 7 years. And also, I'm the founder of Real Men Teach, which is a campaign to increase diversity in teaching, particularly men of color. And so I'm a policy analyst, practitioner, advocate, consumer as a parent of in my school system, but also someone who knows the direct impact of diversity in teaching, and also a descendant of school founders dating back to the 18th, 19th century. Thank you.
Thanks so much for being here, Curtis. And Sekou, last but not least, go ahead.
Hey, thanks very much, Mimi. Thanks for having us. Looking forward to having the conversation with all my great colleagues here. Right now I'm the Vice President for Advocacy and Programs at UNCF, where I've been for just like over the last 8 years. Prior to that, I've had a career in public education in a number of ways. I was a public school teacher for many years. I've also done education nonprofit leadership for years and gotten to know everything from what's going on in early childhood education, how we help children get ready for school, to now doing a little bit more intentional work on the other end of the pipeline. How do we get young people through our K-12 system on to pathways into college and successful careers? Obviously doing that at UNCF now for the last 8 years, have a lot of interest in how we do that in and through HBCUs. And I think there are frankly a lot of lessons from what HBCUs have done in this country for the last 160 plus years that I think are applicable to how do we really focus on the known path of success that African Americans and their institutions have created, and really look to replicate and push those best practices out into a lot of other ways. I think Black self-determination is hugely important, and it's worth mentioning, I'm on this illustrious panel here with 2 other HBCU graduates. I'm a graduate of Morehouse College myself. I think this is a lot about what we believe about our institutions.
Thank you so much, everyone. I'm so excited to dive into this panel. I feel like this is just going to, be a family discussion. We all work very closely with one another. So let's start off by talking about self-determination. So this is something I think a lot about, and I know it heavily influences the conversation around Black educational leadership. We have our founders like Booker T. Washington, who was powered by this thought process around self-determination. And even now, thinking about our current era that we're in, Howard Fuller is someone who has kind of taken the baton, so to speak, of this Black educational leadership concept to think about what it means to have ownership over our schools. So I want to pose a question to everyone. I want you to kind of think about the overall power of Black self-determination for our communities and how it relates to educational leadership overall. What have you seen throughout your work over the years? And Curtis, let's start with you.
No, thank you. I think it comes down to a fundamental question of how you define freedom. I think historically people would define freedom as the absence of bondage. But once you come out of that, how much freedom do you have to live where you want to live, go to school you want to go to school, shop where you want to shop, determine the future of your family. And so I think for a very, very long time, the bar has been set pretty low, particularly for Black people as it relates to what freedom actually means. And oftentimes when we stepped out and declared who we are in our humanity and what was God-given, which is our freedom to do as human beings, to do what everyone else has the freedom to do, we've had to fight, and in many cases had to generation after generation relitigate a lot of these things. So it's in many ways unfortunate that the 4 of us are really having to fight for things that we thought our ancestors had already achieved. And so every generation has to relitigate the same arguments generation after generation. But it's incumbent upon us to declare what freedom is, what it looks like, but also to call out those who would stand in the way of that. And then question, their motives, but also who benefits in the end. To me, you know, when I talk about a lot of the policies and how I look at issues, who benefits? And once we answer that question, it's much easier to get to a strategy on how to address this.
Naomi, what about you? What are your thoughts on Black self-determination?
So I echo what Curtis has said, but also think about our ancestors who created HBCUs and what that was born out of. And I fast forward and I look at the charter space and I see some amazing Black and brown leaders that had the determination, had the forethought and desire to find the best ways to anchor their Blackness, their of colorness, and say, I want to make sure that children have this same experience. Children have the ability to be in spaces that make them proud of who they are, but also provide excellent education. I look at a place like KIPP that was born out of the work of a Black woman in her classroom. And so while the schools were founded by two white men, it was really rooted in the work of a Black woman. And how do we translate that opportunity to not only expand that opportunity, but be thoughtful about how and why that needs to happen. When you look at the disproportionality of Black and white teachers, teachers of color, the need is there. And having people create schools is important. I've seen it, and I've approved out of the 5 schools that we approved here in DC last year, 4 of them were founded by people of color. One of them is known as it's called the Social Justice School. That's something that wouldn't exist in a traditional system. And so how do we create more and more opportunities for that to expand on those types of opportunities, but also create pipelines for teachers, specifically Black teachers, Black and brown teachers, to go into the classroom. There are tons of barriers, and I know we'll probably get to that, but that determination of this is something that needs to be done on behalf of and with community is at the center of why a lot of these schools were created. You spoke earlier about the schools and how schooling was even born in this country. And it comes from what Black people did to make sure that they came out of slavery and had the ability to be functioning members of society. So that determination has always been the through line and why it is that we're having these conversations. But I echo what Curtis just said in terms of having to relitigate that century after century is exhausting. And so how do we eliminate that so we can get to the really good stuff that is there?
Yeah, the progress. So we're looking.
That's right.
Sekou, what are your thoughts on self-determination and educational leadership?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hugely important because I think at the end of the day, like, we have to be honest with ourselves. Like nobody's coming to liberate you or to empower you or your community, right? Like, if we're gonna actually help African Americans en masse, like, be liberated and be empowered in this country, like, we are going to have to do it, like, for ourselves, with each other, like, for our community, right? Any illusions people had that, like, there's some cavalry coming in or some other group of do-gooders are gonna, you know, even I think when you consider the great awakening we're having around race in this country, I would say that that's opening up more space for the things that need to be done. But in order for them to be done well and right, like, we are going to need to have, like, aware and, like, empowered and intelligent and effective, you know, Black leaders to grow the coalition of other Black leaders and co-conspirators to figure out, like, what is it that we need to be doing for and in our community to, you know, forcefully argue for, you know, the resources needed to support our institutions, and to, you know, frankly, to value our communities and our institutions the way other communities, other institutions are valued. And I think unless and until we can make sure that we all really understand what's at stake and what's needed, I mean, part of what keeps cycles of oppression alive, right, is the cutting people off from the information and the reality that, you know, I think, you know, Curtis and Naomi both pointed this out, like, there are tremendous things that Black people and Black leaders have done for each other and for their communities, for their institutions, for hundreds of years in this country. And sadly, far too many people don't know about that. And I'm talking about things that have had significant impact for Black people and Black communities, but also for the country at large, right? Like the country's better off for what Black leaders and Black education leaders specifically have done. And so, you know, we just need to find more ways to empower and uplift and create more of those people.
Mimi, I wanted to say just a saying. Andrew Young during the movement said, rattlesnakes don't commit suicide. It's the idea that those our oppressors are not going to just lay down and just sort of say, okay, we've done this enough, you know, let's move on to something else. You know, there's a meme I saw recently that said, your oppressors are not going to give you the skills to overthrow them. You're not going to learn that in schools that are controlled by people who are the very people who are oppressing you. And so when we talk about HBCUs or, you know, Black school founders or Black educators, this is liberation talk. I mean, quite honest with you, we will have our children will have these same conversations 30, 40 years from now if we're not having these conversations, which I think you did very well, is let's talk about the history. You know, I've been doing more of a self-study on history, but also let's talk about, you know, Black Wall Street. Not theoretically, let's talk about Greenwood. What was going on in Greenwood in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where the average dollar circulated 36 times before it left the community? Like 36. Right now, only 2% of every Black dollar stays in the community. And, you know, we could kind of wear the shirts, but the people who want us to stay where we are don't want us to learn to say Kuzma. They don't want us to learn this history. They don't want us to talk about all the African Americans who had self-determination. They don't want to talk about all the Black legislators who were in South Carolina during Reconstruction. You know, they don't want to talk about, you know, state legislators and what they did in the short period of time that they. And so if you could erase someone's history, this is Carter G. Woodson. If you could take away someone's history, you don't have to worry about the actions. They will fall in line. And so it's up to us to say, you know what, we have to be our own, create our own curriculum, whatever you want to call it, whether it be virtually, hypothetically. How do we create a curriculum for ourselves to say, our oppressors are not going to teach us how to overthrow them. We have to do it ourselves.
Preach is all I gotta say. It actually reminds me of this famous saying that my good friend Dr. Charles Cole says on his podcast every single episode. He's like, we're on our own. So specifically talking about the Black community in education. So this is, I guess I'm getting remnants of that too. But Curtis, I think you already referenced this a little bit, but give us a quick history lesson. Because you did touch on like the freedom schools and what freedom really, you know, what does that look like for us? What did it look like for our communities? So give us a brief history lesson on the history of Black-led schools and its impact on Black students and families.
Well, a lot of history goes back before pre-emancipation. And so there were African Americans who were starting schools, even in the South, free African Americans. I recently learned about a recent ancestor of mine named John Chavis, who is the first African American to ever attend a college in the U.S. He attended what is current present day Princeton University. This goes back to the 1780s, where this person attended college, eventually graduated from another institution, but started a school in North Carolina where educated both Black and white students. One of his former students actually went on to be a U.S. Senator from North Carolina. This is a Black man who opened up a multiracial school in the 18th century that we don't talk about. Some of you all know Ben Chavis, who runs the National Newspaper Association. That's an ancestor of his and of mine. My full name is Curtis Chavis Valentine. I learned about that on my own about 3 or 4 months ago, and I've been doing this work for a very long time. If you fast forward to the early 1900s with Julius Rosenwald and my great-grandparents, Beverly and Martha Valentine in Mecklenburg County, Virginia, being part of this movement of 5,000 schools from Texas all the way to Maryland being built. This is freedom liberation talk, because you had the growth of HBCUs, many of which were looking at how to expand, how to grow, how do you create a pipeline sort of out of many cases the fields into these schools. Booker T. Washington says, I have this Tuskegee Institute, but my students are coming onto campus not prepared for a higher education. And so how do we get them earlier? And through philanthropy and these partnerships You have this. If you fast forward a little further to, a school in New Jersey, where I'm originally from, which is the Manual Training School, or someone known as a boarding town school, which was actually co-founded by the great-grandfather of Susan Rice. This school was the only Black boarding school in the North. It was called the Tuskegee of the North. It was all self-encompassing, so the students did all the landscaping, cooked all the food, did everything. And they had teachers from Harvard, Yale, Hampton, Morehouse, Spelman, all teaching at this one school. And again, these stories don't get told because, again, once we understand our power, it is hard to control us. If you can control people's education, this is why education is so. This is why Sekou and Dave. This is why we're in this game, because we understand they work so hard to keep it from us. Be mindful. If someone works hard to keep something from you, it's got to be something to it. Think about how they're dealing with the vote now. This idea of, on one side, you got brothers, and in my clique too, hey, Kurt, man, why are we voting, bro? I don't mean we vote every year. I said, but on the other side, they're doing everything they can to disenfranchise us. Be mindful. If it didn't matter that much, they wouldn't be so hard pressed trying to take it away from us. And so the more we learn about our history, the Rosenwalds, William Valentine, which is a descendant of, I'm a descendant of, who led the manual training school, or the John Chavises from the 18th century. This is a part of our history. This is where HBCUs literally come from, because these schools were sort of pipelines, and every Rosenwald school had an HBCU within 20 or 30 miles of them. My HBCU was St. Paul College, which unfortunately is no longer here. And so this is, again, a consequence. You think about the schools that were here, and the very school that my Rosenwald school was a pipeline into no longer exists. It was an education school. It was a teacher training school. We are still trying to address parity around teacher diversity, while HBCUs are struggling to stay open. And this is something that I think is all connected and part of a grand scheme to keep us where we are, and unmindful of our history and what we're capable of.
Thank you so much for that breakdown. Sekou, I want to direct this next question to you. So a bulk of the research on Black education has been more student-centric, so focuses on data around achievement and whatnot. However, it is important to note the specific role that Black people play as educational leaders, and it has important implications for policy and practice, as I'm sure you've uncovered in your work. As a former Black male educator, can you talk about your experience working in schools and what that ultimately meant for your students and their families?
Yeah, so I'll start with this. My first day as a sixth grade teacher in the South Bronx, I met my class outside, and students are lined up ready to meet their teacher and go inside from the playground. And the little girl standing in the front of the line looks up at me and she goes, "You are a teacher? You're the first man teacher I ever had," right? And this is, sixth grade, so she's been in school 7 years, right? So, that's, okay, that's worth note that she's come this far in her experience and never had a male teacher, right? And, look, I know a lot of people who, look up and go, it was many, many years before they had a Black teacher, and I'll just say this for context. So I grew up in DC, went to DC public schools for a variety of reasons. In the era I grew up in, the overwhelming majority of my teachers were Black. And in fact, that was true for most schools across the district. Didn't matter who the student population was, like the majority of the teaching force was Black. And I think, there are a few things there, including things like, these were people who lived in and were parts of these communities, right? Like, my parents would see my teachers like at the grocery store. Like, you want to help keep kids like on their P's and Q's about like, am I complying? Am I doing what I need to be doing in school? If they know their mother might see their teacher at the store today, like it reinforces a lot of things, right? And so I think it's important. But another thing that's really important to me is that, like, you talk about student-centric research, and that's right. What's amazing to me about like what we know about the importance of Black teachers is Black teachers, like the presence of Black teachers increases and improves performance for all students. Black students do better when they have more Black teachers, and so do white students, right? Like, it's one of these things where everybody benefits from it. And we have to really ask ourselves, like, if everybody's going to benefit from this, like, why we aren't more committed to making sure that we get there. And I think, some of it is hints back to something Curtis said, like, there's an economic empowerment issue here as well. And I think, we have to be clear-eyed about the need to pipeline more people into these careers because it's beneficial to them. It's important to our communities. It's important to our students in just so many ways, to just have teachers that look like them, right? But teachers that also come from communities like theirs and in their communities that are members of those communities. And, like, once again, you've got to have teachers and frankly, Black people at all levels and at all types of roles in the system, because that's how you get, that's how you eventually grow your future leaders, is that there are people coming in at all kinds of different entry points with very different types of experience and skill sets. And then, people latch onto it and decide, like, they see a path for themselves. But part of that is, right, like, if I'm, a young Black professional in the field of education, my belief about my career path and role, place in leadership is oftentimes determined by seeing people like me represented, right? And so if, we need to have more leaders so we can create more leaders. And frankly, when you look at things around, teacher retention, there's a lot to be said for, teachers having more successful experiences when they have people in leadership roles that can appreciate, affirm, understand where they're coming from. And, having more Black educators and in all sorts of varieties of roles, just hugely important, because I think, for students and families to see themselves in the school reflected in, the leaders and the sort of the trusted people in their communities, I don't think we can overstate how important that is. I mean, I spent about a decade teaching, and I can tell you, this is true. And ironically, I found this to be true even with my own children, who for years when they were little, like they felt like teachers like walked on water. And I mean, like, I would hear them, it would come up like, oh yeah, my dad's a teacher. It's like, yeah, my dad's a teacher. Like, teachers, they can do anything. It's like, you don't want to tell them, like, that might not entirely be true, but it is, I think, hugely important. And the role that teachers play in shaping and guiding, young people and being support for their community just can't be overstated.
And, to your point about school leaders, especially having more school leaders and school founders of color, they tend to also they don't overlook hiring and staffing. Like that is something they primarily focus on. So they try and have like this each one reach one kind of phenomenon that they like to abide by, where they're going to be very intentional about who they're hiring, to not only the educators, but to the people who are going to be driving the school buses, to the people that are going to be providing school lunches and breakfast and whatnot. They're very intentional about making sure that they're getting representation from their communities as well. So I love that aspect of making sure that it is a community-centered approach, as opposed to just focusing on the classroom or the school.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would just add quickly to that. I mean, one of the things I think that gets overlooked on that, right now, once again, as the country's waking up to needing to have more diversity, is that one of the real important values of having diversity in any workplace is that when you have a variety of perspectives, viewpoints, backgrounds, you're more likely to see and find like diverse talent to build your leadership pipeline, right? Because you're going to have people who are seeing people who remind them of themselves and realize, like, while it might not be obvious to some of my other colleagues, the potential that this person has, it's clear to me. And I think that, that's certainly true in classrooms, right? Like when teachers see in students things that remind them of themselves or remind them of people they knew growing up, they're more likely to cultivate and nurture those things. And it's hard when you're dealing with young people that you really don't have a personal connection to. And it's not to say that people can't do it, but I think it's important to create opportunities for students and for school leaders and everyone in a school to get connected with people who have a greater probability of seeing something that reminds them of other examples of success, so they can help promote like a diversity of experiences and sort of like a diversity of sort of characteristics that reflect, you know, the knowledge and skills need to be successful, because it's out there. We've just, as a society, done a bad job of cultivating all the different ways people succeed.
I mean, real quickly, can I just touch on one word you mentioned? Intentionality. When we give African Americans the keys to the kingdom when they to your school, it's not about being intentional about it. It's almost unintentional, right? The idea that you are part of a fraternity or a sorority, or went to this HBCU, and you post a job on your social media page or your Facebook page, the people who are going to respond are going to be people in your network. And I mean, it's when my wife is looking for a music teacher, and I say, well, I got a Morehouse brother who was, you know, looking to teach, was already directing at the choir, the Glee Club, calls him up, gets him in, perfect. Now people say, well, how did it happen? He's in the network already. He's already under the umbrella. The idea of like having to be intentional, this idea about diversity, equity, inclusion, and we'll talk about this, you know, till our ears fall off. But as long as people have to sort of be intentional about something, to think about it, there will always be obstacles to that. Versus, you know what? As I get older, I don't need all that. Just give me the keys and let me do my thing. And what you will see is my network and my village coming together for me, built up. I know someone who knows someone. That's how the world works. And that's how other communities work. That's how other cultures work. And so you don't have to be intentional when they give us the keys. So a lot of ways, I mean, we could kind of, again, try to sort of do this. And this gets back to the age-old conversation around integration and segregation. And we could talk about that till our ears fall off. But there was something there. There was something about, again, this Greenwood, this Tulsa conversation that we have that I think we should have. And why is it? And I'm really quickly. There have been at least 2 references to Tulsa, Oklahoma in popular culture in the last year. If you watch HBCO and you saw either The Watchmen or Lovecraft Country, both very, very popular TV programs really touched on these communities. They touched on them from the sort of the massacre part, sort of the end. But prior to all of that, you had these thriving communities which didn't have to be intentional about much of anything. You put in proximity. To Sekou's point, you're around your customers, so you know what they want. There's accountability. There's obviously a recycling of resources. There's circulation. Who do you hire? You know, who gets the contracts? It kind of works itself out just by proximity, accountability, and relationships. That I think, as long as we're trying to sort of fit ourselves to this round hole, you know, into the square peg, we'll continue to have this back and forth and, you know, not be mindful of what's happening. Listen to what's going on. People buying farms in places like Georgia, South Carolina. You know, just give me my 40 acres. We're going to throw it back. Give me my 40, get your 40, get your 40. We're going to open a school, a bank, a church. We're going to do it all. And then, and also give my per pupil. Just keep it, you know, run that too. But let's have those conversations. I'm getting too old to have these conversations about trying to fit in. I mean, I'm on my old man right now, because they told me when I was young, the OGs told me, okay, young guy, okay, young guy, you'll get it. Okay, one day you'll understand. And now I'm there like, okay, I'm having this serenity prayer. Grant me serenity to know the things I cannot change, the courage of things and the wisdom to know the difference. There's something I can't change. There's one thing I can change is what I do with the resources that are given to me. I'm gonna make sure Mimi gets some, and Sekou gets some, and Naomi gets some, and everybody in their crew gets some. That's how we have to have those conversations. I get passionate about this because I'm tired of trying to fit in and trying to change my speech and try to get this grant and get this contract and do right and be the articulate Negro in the room. No. We got to own ours. And I think we can, but we have everybody we need right on our team. I don't need no new team members. The team is already, the venture's already set. The venture's already set. Let's do it.
That's right. That's right. And I really love that both of you made the connection about how the Black community sees ourselves as a community, and that we have in the past and can do it now, using that community to build our own, right? And so the reference that you made about Watchmen, the reference that you made about Lovecraft Country, that's the sense of community that showed up in that, especially in Lovecraft Country, that you weren't alone. You were with these other people. And when we have folks in our community who decide they want to assimilate, they want to get closer to the proximity of power, they want those things, that's when things begin to shatter, right? They buy into the things of like HBCUs are not as high quality. They buy into all the things that try to minimize the power of who we are, and not recognizing that that's intentional, right? You have people who call themselves public education advocates who intentionally and subversively have said things to minimize Black people, because they know the power and what is possible when we collectively do things. When we are in community, we can do so much more.
I think I have a new title for this next session. It's going to be I Got the Keys. We got to play DJ Khaled's song in the background. And Curtis, of course, he'll be moderating or facilitating that conversation in some way. But yes, and Naomi, you just touched on community. So I wanted to pivot to you. So your work is primarily focused on driving community-centered reform that involves hearing from community members to better inform education reforms and policies. So throughout your work and your research, what have you, and your leadership, what have you learned are the most effective ways we can help support our current and future generations of Black educational leaders?
So the idea of community, of course, is we think about our neighborhoods, we think about that, but what does it really mean to support one another? And, you know, the HBCU network that, you know, the three of us that are on the panel have lived through has demonstrated that to us and given us insight into how that can happen, even in, you know, where I attended college, Tougaloo College in Mississippi. It was a part of a network of Southern institutions that were focused on how do we ensure that Black people have what they need. And so they created a day school, right? That school then was an immediate pipeline to their college. The ways that I think about the work that I do now is how do we make sure that the folks who have the best intentions but don't know all the nuances of the Black community understand the harm that they have done by doing, like looking at metrics. We care about the data, we think about that, but what harm have you done by not asking people, how do we do this in a way that honors your history, honors your work, honors the legacy of what this program was even born out of, right? And so I look at programs, or I look at organizations like BNOLA, so Black Educators in New Orleans, and how they think about connecting current teachers to the legacy Black teachers of New Orleans and making sure that they are in constant communication, in, you know, professional development or professional learning communities, so that that information is translated from one generation to the next. And so I see that as an example. I see other examples where we're creating pipelines for people who weren't necessarily thinking about education, but could be outstanding educators. And so they're, you know, Curtis and the work that he's doing. I look at Brothers Empower to Teach, that's also based in New Orleans. And so that grow your own, that understanding of how do we connect those dots, but also the value of talking to not only our grass tops leaders, but our grassroots leaders. If anything, the racial reckoning that we're going through now in 2020 has demonstrated to us time and time again that the people that had their feet on the pavement are the ones that know what it is that people want and what they desire to see, right? And what they want to actualize. And so listening to, you know, pounding the pavement and asking people, what is it that you want? What do you think is possible for education? So much can be born of that. And we don't do enough of that. We have people that have gone through school, they think they know, and they don't really connect back to the people that are living that experience day in and day out. Of course, I'm not trying to pump somebody else's research, but Sekou and I have talked about this in the time that we worked together. UNCF did some really thoughtful perceptions research in terms of how Black people see the K-12 education space. So parents, grass tops leaders and students and having a baseline of understanding. KIPP has done some of that and understanding that before, when they were being very prescriptive about what schools they would suggest that their alums attend, they recognized in talking to their alums that were in college that there was a heightened sense of belonging for students who attended HBCUs. They wouldn't have learned that had they not had that conversation, had they not gone out to really churn that data and understand what was happening for individuals that were that had gone on to go to college. And now we're learning that college is that something all of the alums of KIPP want to do. We want to be able to help them figure out career-wise, what are the best avenues to go into the careers that they care the most about. And so that really is, how do you have touch points with all of those pieces, all of those segments of our greater community to understand what is it that people want, what do they want to actualize, and how do you help them do that? And when we think about it that way, instead of I know what you should have, because that is what's taking us away from what's possible. People thinking, oh, the metrics, the numbers, the data, the assessments, that being the end all be all, instead of actually having that dialogue, that relationship building that is necessary to really bolster and have an undergird for community.
Thank you so much for sharing all of your insight. And I'm going to pose this last question to everyone on the panel. So historically speaking, the dearth of Black and Brown leaders in education has been compounded by opportunities to access, which is something I believe Naomi had referenced earlier. So what opportunities are there for folks to get involved in the process of augmenting education for our Black and Brown students? And you can even feel free to reference any schools or school founders who are doing these things really well. So let's go ahead and get started with you, Naomi.
So I have the unique privilege of being in one of the places where we're very thoughtful as an authorizer when it comes to charter schools. But I've also had the amazing experience of being able to be in community with people who have the opportunity to go into teaching, both traditionally and through alternative teaching programs. So I think the way that we think about this, the polarization that has taken place in the conversations we have around education has done more harm than doing any good when it comes to public education. And so you take the alternative methods that people have gone into teaching, you look at that and you can see that there's a growing number of Black people that are using that avenue because they know the traditional way just doesn't work for them. So one, that's one of the things that they can do. Look at alternative programs, certification programs. They've been villainized in some communities, but at the same time, doubling down on programs like Relay, Teach for America, et cetera. Those things can really bolster how we approach education. The other piece of that, and when I think about there are so many Black people who have done the work, and the ones that I just want to highlight really quickly and think about when I think about across this country. I look at Lagra Newman in Nashville, Margaret Fortune in California, Sharif El-Mekki in Philly, Tim King in Chicago, and Amanda Johnson in the Delta of Mississippi. These people are, if not founding schools, they've dug deeply to figure out the best ways to show up for Black people. And so they've had that opportunity because they're not going into a traditional system, because they're utilizing a pathway that creates an opportunity for them to have the autonomy, like you said earlier, to control their own budgets, to have control of their hiring, to be thought partners with the community and building out from there, versus having someone have to tell them how they have to do that work. And so when we think about education and the polarization, like I said earlier, the polarization of, oh, if it's not a traditional school, it's a public school, then it doesn't count. And I think that we're looking at that from a lens that is not our own, right? Black people are hearing the rhetoric that is coming from the mouths of people who do not care about our community in the same way that we do. When we hear the things that are dismissive of Black people, that are dismissive of HBCUs, that is not language that is of our own. That is internalized oppression that people are spouting out and thinking about this in a way of like, I know better because these white people told me that this makes more sense. No, we know for sure that Black students were reading at higher levels when they were where? In front of Black teachers, surrounded by Black people who love them and care for them, and were doing this in a way that they were in control. When we have taken that away from people, I don't care if you are the superintendent of a large school district, you still have to operate in a system that has not served our students well. And how do we shift the conversation from the polarization to what is working, and how do we prioritize who's doing it well and helping them grow?
That was beautiful. Thank you. Beautiful as always. Sekou, what about your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, Naomi hit on so many things. I mean, one, I think we need to collectively continue to do more to elevate all the examples of success and of excellence. We're going to learn much more from the things that are working than from the things that are not. And look, let's be honest, like the nature of American culture and media is we love to talk to death about all the things that are wrong. There's not much learning to be had there. Like there might be some entertainment value to it, but like I'm an old school teacher. Like you're not learning anything by beating the dead horse of all the things that haven't worked. Like, so, do that a little bit to get it out of your system. We're going to talk much more about the things that are working, the people who have innovated, and frankly, like all the historic and, current examples of people who are doing it right, and ask ourselves, like, what are we prepared to do to scale those things up, right? To give people with a demonstrated track record of successfully supporting the academic and, social and career success of Black people, like the key is to do it for more of them. I mean, there are a lot of, and you talked about this, and you're right, I mean, part of the challenge is that, once again, sort of the legacy of racism and lack of opportunity in this country means that successful Black people in any field of endeavor struggle way more to get the opportunities and access to resources and opportunity to scale those examples, right? So we've seen this in education at every level. Black leaders struggle to generate philanthropic support for demonstrated successes way more than white leaders do. And like that's a question for both philanthropy and government to struggle with and to come to grips with. They got to like correct those historic wrongs, because we're hurting both Black communities and Black children by not recognizing like success is success. And in a lot of ways, rather than investing in people that and you like, who simply can't deliver against the promise, why don't we invest in the people who just keep delivering the results we need and unleash them to do it more and better? And because they're the ones likely to inspire the other leaders we need to do this work. And so, we had to invest in Black people. We had to invest in Black institutions. I mean, and we talked about things they're doing, but I think about like the work that Xavier University is doing with their teacher residency. I mean, this is real, like focus, innovative, like serving a community work that we need to get out there and do more of. We're fortunate at UNCF to be running, an education fellows program for college students who want to learn more about getting into K-12. And we just need much more of that. We need to create way more opportunity. We need to also, and we need to understand this, right? Part of opportunity means that if you're really giving people opportunity, you don't saddle them with the expectation that if everybody doesn't succeed, it was a failure somehow, because that's just not the way it works. And like that too often is the problem. Like people get told they're being given an opportunity, but the opportunity is so narrow that if you don't succeed, you don't get a second shot. And like, that's not like, back to like, what is freedom? That's not freedom. Like freedom isn't you get one shot, and if you don't deliver, that's it. And, we have to be real and honest about that, because there's a lot of energy and effort being, circling back to HBCUs, like people even look at like, what is it the HBCUs are doing that's working? And then they want to figure out, well, how do we bring that to other institutions? I'm like, hold on for a second. How about instead of trying to help somebody who's never done it before, let's invest in the institutions that have done it for hundreds of years so they can do it more and better. And like the institutions who have never done it for Black people, frankly, who haven't really shown that they're actually committed to doing it for Black people, let them figure it out on their own, right? Like we don't need to spend any more of our money on that, but like we continue to say, oh, well, how do we help these other institutions do it? Like, first of all, they got to prove that they really want to, and I'm not convinced that they really do.
Yeah, we definitely need to have more conversations around scalability. Couldn't agree more. Curtis, you want to take it away? Close it all out.
Well, the 2 points. I mean, I want to say first, freedom ain't free. And so what does that mean? Like, we have to invest. And particularly as one group I just want to highlight is parent organizations, the ones who are fighting at these school board meetings, marching, the ones who are doing a lot of the work that a lot of us don't think is worth our time, or we don't have the energy for. Organizations, people like Sarah Carpenter in Memphis, Kim Dukes in Atlanta, Keisha Young in Oakland, support these organizations. A recurring gift, $5 a month, $10, $20 a Christmas. These are organizations. Dr. King, the civil rights movement was funded by individuals. There was some philanthropy there too, but a lot of folks just investing within the community. And so, this stuff is not free. So invest in parent organizations that are going to be pushing and holding people accountable when you're not looking. And you know why freedom ain't free? Because freedom pays. Freedom pays in all the schools that we're talking about. When you give the keys to these school leaders and they're able to keep these resources within their circle. I think about Mariama Shahid in Indianapolis. My organization put out a paper on innovation schools, innovation guide of how to start your own innovation school, which is sort of a quasi-public school, has a lot more autonomy, but also the level of accountability. Her school is thriving, working with these language immersion program, but she has the power to keep a lot of those resources within her circle. My own story, again, I talk about the Rosenwald schools. My great uncle started a bus company. And with that money, put 7 kids through HBCUs, Virginia State, Virginia Union, St. Paul College. That economy stayed in Mecklenburg County, Virginia, because of the school that was created. Freedom does pay. If we invest in the organizations, in order for us to get for them to advocate, for us to have the innovation schools and the charter schools and those schools for us to lead, it will pay off for us. And in the end, support African Americans and groups that are, my group, Real Men Teach. What I'm doing is keeping money within our community, using that to send it back out for scholarships for Black men to stay in the classroom, to stay in school. And it's pretty much a church sort of tithing sort of situation. Money goes in, money comes back. It is cyclical. I'm trying to replicate this money within the community through my campaign, and others can do the same thing. And people support me personally on a personal level. Hey, Curtis, I got you. But there are thousands of Curtises out there, thousands of Naomis and Sekus and Mimis who are ready to do this work. We have to invest in one another, support one another, because again, freedom ain't free. Why? Because freedom pays.
Mic drop. So I'm going to just go ahead and say now is the time to have more conversations about reimagining education for all students, but particularly for our students who have been underserved all these years. So our Black and Brown students deserve better. And I just want to go ahead and pose this question to all of my current and future education leaders. What will your legacy be? So I will end with that. Thank you again for joining us. Thank you to all the panelists for sharing your wisdom and all of your knowledge. We really appreciate you.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thanks. Great to see you all. Thanks, Mimi, for the conversation.
Yeah, I'm a nerd. The way I see it, I inherited a superpower. I learned to speak the language of the future, and the code I live by is the code I write. Building a better world, putting on the next generation of kids like me. Look out, world. We got it from here.
Check out Ian and a whole new crew of future leaders stepping up on the Instagram series Black and Positively Golden Mentors, and see how McDonald's is helping them rise.
What a great session. Coming up next, we will have Tyron Johnson, Collegiate 100 President of Southern University, to introduce our third workshop, Affecting Your Brand, Resume Writing and Interview Skills.
Greetings, fellow collegiates and sponsoring chapters of the 100 Black Men of America. I am Tyron Johnson, a graduating criminal justice student from Lutch, Louisiana. As the 2020-2021 president of the Collegiate 100 of Southern University, I am so excited for this year's virtual conference. On behalf of all collegiates, I would like to extend a huge thank you to the 100 Black Men of America and all sponsors that made this year's conference possible during the midst of a global pandemic. The upcoming workshop will provide tips and best practices on effective branding, resume writing, and interviewing tips. As a graduating senior, I understand how difficult it may be to balance academics and a social life while preparing for life after college. Therefore, it is extremely important to network and utilize career services to gain insight throughout your matriculation. Throughout the duration of this conference, I strongly encourage you all to network and engage with guest speakers to gain valuable insight for possible jobs and internships.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining our playback session for affecting your brand, your resume writing, and interviewing tips session. We have lots to cover, so let's get started. My name is Ruth Armendariz, and I have been with Wells Fargo now for 8 years, and have been in financial services for about 25 years. I'm part of our National Programs and Partnerships team, and I partner heavily with our campus early talent recruiting programs. So the information I'm going to share today is typically information that we share with our early talent students as they apply for internships and full-time early talent programs. So I hope you find it useful. In my introduction, I've also added my LinkedIn profile. So I encourage you to reach out to me and maybe, happy to connect with you if you have additional questions, or sometimes even as time permits, can also do a resume check with you as well. So hope you enjoy the session. Today's agenda is going to cover 3 main components. We're going to talk about what a brand is and how it impacts what comes across on your resume and in your interview. We're going to talk about Resume 101, and we'll do some tips on do's and don'ts. And we'll also talk about an effective interview. And now that we're in this kind of virtual environment, how to have a successful virtual interview, how to prepare for a behavioral interview. And then we'll do a few tips. Now, this particular deck is very large, and typically, when we have a session, we might have a session that goes over, an hour and a half to 2 hours. So we also have included an appendix to this deck, and we encourage you to use the resources attached at the end. I'm going to cover a lot of information today, so take some notes, and we hope that you find this also very helpful. So as you prepare for an interview and you think about a brand, many of you are likely thinking, well, what's a personal brand? And you're probably thinking, well, when I think of a brand, I think of my favorite shoe, my favorite coffee, maybe the type of clothes you wear. You don't see yourself as a brand because you think a brand's part of a corporation, not a person. But branding and your personal brand is actually really important when you think about the interview process. So we're going to talk about what that brand is and how to make sure that you ensure that your brand is on point when you are applying, when you are networking, and how does that brand come across to others. So as I was preparing this deck, I looked up the definition of what a brand is. And a brand is the perception or impression of an individual based on their expertise, experience, competencies, and achievements. So you might be thinking, well, then that means it's an opinion of others, right? So how can I control what others think of me? If it's an opinion, it's an opinion. I have an opinion of what I think of other things, so not quite sure how I can control that. Or you might be thinking, well, I'm early in my career. I've only worked maybe retail, fast food, or maybe I'm just a freshman in college. I don't think I have a brand just yet, so I'm not quite sure how to create a brand. So know that your brand will evolve as you move up in not only your campus career, but then as you start, obviously in a professional career environment. So a brand is really what individuals hear, see, read about you, and we're going to talk about that read about you. Sometimes you think, well, how do people read about me? Well, social media comes into play. So just know that that definitely impacts your brand and what other people think about you. So as you think about that, and let's just say you're early on in your career, I want you to think about your brand and approaching a job application, an interview, and even creating your resume as you would approach dating. So I know you're probably thinking dating, I don't know, see the correlation, but an application is just like dating. If you are interested in asking, a cute, boy or girl out for a date, and you wouldn't necessarily approach that person and say, well, I've really never dated. I don't have a lot of experience. I've never really on time. I really couldn't give you any details of any successful relationships I've had. I'll likely forget details. I'm not very task oriented. I can't think of a time that I took initiative, and I'll probably not call you back and complete any task. Well, you're likely not to get a date, right? So you're not going to get a yes from that individual. But as you are applying for a job, you are putting your best foot forward, and you're not approaching that conversation with what you can't do. What I want you to really think about is you're not going to approach a conversation with a recruiter as, well, I don't have this skill, or I'm not quite sure what I want to do, because you've already put in the mindset of that individual, well, they really don't know what they want to do. They don't have the skill set, so why should I consider them? So don't lead with a negative, because that's what we'll remember. You want to make sure that you really think of what your brand and your approach is. We'll talk a little bit about your 60-second elevator speech and what that is a little bit later in the presentation. But that's what I want you to think about. Think about the fact that when you are approaching and you want to get a yes, you are putting your best foot forward. And in a job application, you want to make sure that you're putting your best resume forward, you're putting your best communications forward, so that you not only get a yes and an invite to an interview, but ultimately a job offer. So with that in mind, we talked a little bit about, what people see, what people hear, what people read about you. So I know all of us likely have some social media presence, right? So I want you to think about social media impacting how others think of you in your brand. When you think about others talking about you in a positive environment, in a positive way, that at this point becomes sponsorship. That means others are speaking positively about you when you're not in the room. And that is the key to ensuring that you are creating your brand. So you may think, well, since I don't have a lot of experience, how can I change my brand, or how can I even start creating one? So if you have limited work experience, what you want to start doing is you want to ensure that you're volunteering, that you set some goals and you follow through. Many of you can remember that individual when you were in school where you're like, gosh, that individual, is our class president. They're always confident. They're always, the first person to raise their hand, or, they just seem to have it all put together. That individual had a brand because they were known as the person who always had it together, who was very confident. So that's how they were known. And believe me, you guys were talking about that individual when that person was in the room. That was their brand. So you kind of want to approach it the same way. What do you want people to think about when they think about you? So one of the key things is to know that it's going to take time, it's going to take some practice, but make sure that you're genuine. People will remember the details, and people will remember how genuine you came across. And they'll also remember, when you're early on in your career, that progression, where you started and where you've come, and they're going to be able to speak positively about that. Now, we don't always get our branding on point. There's going to be a few stumbles, there's going to be some adjustments, but it's okay to fail, because it's more important how you handle those challenges than not even approaching and working on those goals. So I really want to challenge you on working on those goals and understanding that whether you're a freshman or you have limited work experience, that you have an opportunity to work and create your brand. And that brand will enhance throughout your college years and then well into your professional career. It'll change a bit. The other piece that I will give you as some advice is that as you are building your brand, we all look to others to see what others are doing, success of others, and it's okay to do that. But you want to make sure that you are selective in who you kind of want to follow, right? Make sure that who the person you're following aligns to what you want to be known as, because I want to challenge you all to be leaders, not followers. So many times, I think back when I started my career, early on, I had a mentor who allowed me to listen to how they did presentations, how they interviewed, how they consulted with the business. And I started mimicking and learning and really kind of stealing her talking points, because I knew that was someone that I knew had a strong brand, was respected in the work environment. Others really enjoyed working with her. And I wanted to be the same person. I wanted to be the person that others liked working with, saw me as a team player, and that I could then have a strong brand and kind of mirror myself after this individual. So be selective in who you choose, be observant of others, steal best traits from others, and then also learn from others, right? You're going to see, ooh, yeah, mistake. Definitely don't want to do that. So make sure that you think about that, and I caution you as you kind of think of who you want to follow in that selection process of others to follow. I want to kind of go back to the social media portion of it. You might be thinking, well, on my resume, I mean, who knows how to even find me on Facebook or, something I posted on TikTok or Snapchat. Know that some employers might have that as part of their process. They may go and look to see, let's look at the individual social media presence. So you want to make sure that you avoid posting things such as strong political comments that may become as aggressive. You want to definitely make sure you avoid inappropriate language, inappropriate posting of pictures. And you might think, well, I only posted it to a small group of friends and I trust my friends and they won't be sharing it out. But all of a sudden someone does share it out because they just thought it was funny with them and they think somebody else might enjoy it. Now, once it's shared out, you have no control on how that information, that post, that like has been shared out with others. So you now are losing control over your brand. So really take stock and think about what you're posting out there. And if you are putting your LinkedIn profile on your resume, then make sure that your LinkedIn profile is worked on. So go back in there, update it, make sure that you update any affiliations. All those things definitely are things that some employers may look at. Now, other employers may have kind of a golden rule of, nope, we don't look at it. But you don't want to be that individual that's not quite sure, so you just still post it, and then the employer you are actually working with did see your social media. So make sure that you're thinking about that. It's really important, and it could be an easy mistake. Honestly, an innocent mistake when you are thinking of your brand. So please make sure you think about that. So let's jump into Resume 101 and resume building tips. So there are 4 key components, and part of this deck, we have attached a actually Word template. So we've made it very easy for you all to create your resume, and you'll see it here. So there's 4 basic components that we want you to think about when you are building your resume. You want to make sure your resume has your contact information. I recently got through an exercise of reaching out to students, and you would be surprised how many students only had an email address, and I was trying to get a phone number to actually, schedule them. And many times, even though I was emailing them, it was going through their junk mail. So make sure that it has accurate contact information. That's very important. You'll then have your education, your experience, your leadership, and then any other extras go into your additional. And that could be maybe perhaps if you're bilingual, maybe perhaps you have some technical skills, Java, Excel, something you really want to highlight. And what I want to make sure that you do in those additional skills, highlight the skills that actually mirror the job posting. So if the job posting maybe talks about public speaking and you have that experience, then highlight some public speaking. If it is looking for some technical skills, then make sure that you are highlighting those technical skills. If I have a job posting and I'm looking for someone with strong Excel experience or maybe some Java or maybe some programming, and I don't see that at all in the resume, I might skip that resume and go on to the next individual because I just didn't see that they had skills. Now you might have it, but because we can't see it on the resume, we're going to move on to the next individual. So this particular template is very easy. Now, one of the things that I want to talk about is the template has employer, your title, and then I've only listed one bullet. You should not have just one bullet for each of your experience. So make sure you elaborate that. The other piece that you want to make sure that you think about, this particular template obviously has some white, we call it kind of white. Use all the margins. Make sure that you are making it a robust and a full resume. When you have a resume that has a lot of white space, that indicates very junior experience or no experience at all. So make sure that you are taking into consideration volunteer experience, any experience that you're doing through an organization, any maybe conferences or leadership opportunities that you're taking on in school, many projects you can list. Projects that you are doing in your classes. So let's say, for example, you might be taking a class on project management. So, kind of highlight some of those projects that you're leading or you're contributing, whether you're managing a budget, a project plan. All those skills can definitely come into play when a recruiter is looking at your resume, because some roles will take education in lieu of work experience. So do not avoid saying, well, that experience really didn't correlate to what I'm applying to. It was a class assignment. I'm not going to include it. Make sure that you do that. I once interviewed an individual that had very junior experience, had a good interview, but then at the very end, I said, is there anything else that you'd like to share? And the individual went into this whole kind of overview of a business that they were leading. They had actually started their own landscaping business, were responsible for marketing, for sales, for managing customer relationships, for building their business. And they've been doing this for 3 years. And when I asked why they didn't list it on their resume, they said, well, it has nothing to do with financial services. This is landscaping, but it's a business. So all those skills definitely need to be included on a resume. So you might be thinking, well, it doesn't correlate to where I'm going to be applying to. It's not the same industry. All those are transferable skills that definitely should be reflected on your resume. There's a few things that I want you to avoid. You want to avoid graphics, color, and pictures. You'd be surprised. Sometimes we open up a resume and it's very busy because we're like, oh my gosh, where do I concentrate? I've got, red bullet points here. I've got a picture. I've got graphics. I've got, I've had, graphics as far as a moon and stars. Yes, it definitely sets you apart, but it doesn't set you apart in a positive way. And ironically, most of the resumes we received are going to be scanned and shared, out through via email. So as a recruiter, I don't need to see the graphics. I need to be able to show your skill sets, then share those with the hiring manager. So avoid doing all that. Another tip that I'll share when thinking about resumes, a recruiter will spend about 60 seconds reading a resume. So as a recruiter, when I'm looking at a resume, many times if it's an early talent resume that I'm looking at, I'm looking for a few things. So I'm looking for when are they graduating, what is their major, what leadership experience do they have on campus. So I look for those things first. But if as I'm looking through those things, I see a typo or grammatical errors, you automatically go to the bottom of our pile because I only have 16 seconds or 60 seconds. When we post a job position, for every one position that we post, we may get a few hundred resumes. So as a recruiter, we're going very quickly through these resumes. So you want to make sure that you avoid those typos and grammatical errors because that's going to automatically put you to the bottom of the list. A recruiter may or may not go back to that bottom of the list Or they may say, well, I've got plenty of strong resumes. There's no need for me to go back to those resumes. The other thing that I will share with you is that most job descriptions, as one of their desired qualifications, lists attention to detail. So I personally, when I see typos and grammatical errors, I know that person does not have attention to detail because they didn't review or had someone reference and cross-reference their resume for typos and grammatical errors. They just did it very quickly and submitted it, didn't necessarily put a second thought in it. So their attention to detail is lacking. I'm going to decline that person and put them at the very bottom of the list. And I likely do not go back to those resumes because as I'm going to present those to the hiring manager is like, gosh, did you notice this person had a typo? And sometimes it's very minor typos that you think, well, spell check didn't catch it. Well, spell check doesn't catch it when it's you were wanting to put the number 2, but you put TO instead of the number 2. So those are simple things that you might think, well, I ran spell check. Nope. Make sure you have second eyes. Make sure that you have other people reading it. And when I say other people, sometimes, yes, you can ask your parents, but sometimes your parents are going to be very nice and not give you very critical, constructive feedback. Ask a professor. Use your career services on campus. Make sure that they're taking a look at your resume so that you are putting your best foot forward when you're submitting that resume. Now, there's a few don'ts that I will recommend that you also don't include in your resume. So if you don't have a GPA over 3.0, then I discourage you from putting it on your resume unless an employer requires it. So this puts you at a disadvantage. I'll tell you, Wells Fargo does not require GPA, but if you are, we're looking at 2 candidates, and let's just say an employer is looking at 2 candidates, they have equivalent work experience, maybe they're even in the same school, and maybe they both have the same retail experience, but someone has a 4.0 and somebody has a 2.7. And the 2.7 is very active on campus. Maybe they're part of a leadership team. And then the 4.0 is not only on scholarship, but does volunteer work. So they're demonstrating on their resume that they have a strong brand. They're able to multitask. Without us even talking to this person, we're going to go for the 4.0 resume versus the 2.7. And the 2.7 might have had a situation where, maybe they weren't able to drop a class in time and they ended up having to take that class and take the hit on the GPA, and you don't get a chance to explain that because the recruiter's already looked at it at your resume. So avoid doing that if you do not have a strong GPA. But also make sure that you look at what that employer is looking for. If in their job description they list GPA must be listed, then obviously you're going to have to list it. The other thing that I want you to make sure that you don't forget, include your graduation date, both month and year, your major. Many times, if I have a manager who is looking for a technical major, they're coming to us and saying, okay, I'm looking for somebody that's graduating December 2020 with CIS, information technology, maybe I'm looking for particular skill sets. So we're looking for those things in a resume. So don't forget that. We have often seen resumes that don't have a major, or actually I can't even tell when they graduate. So many times we're looking at a resume to determine, do they fit the graduation timeline of what we're looking for an intern or a full-time opportunity. If we can't tell your grad date, because of the volume of resumes we receive, you're not going to get a phone call. The resume will just go to the bottom of the pile, and many times we don't go back to our alternate list because we do have very strong resumes that come through. So make sure that you think of that. Then the other thing that I want you to kind of think about is don't get too comfortable on your resume. Sometimes, you tend to use some slang. You tend to, use what is considered weak language. So make sure that you have action words, action items on your resume that really reflect your skill sets and what you're going to bring to the table. Make sure that you do include your experience. I mentioned that example of that student who didn't put their landscaping business. That's very, very key. We're not only looking for experience that might be in the same industry, but we're looking for experience that has transferable skills. So make sure that you think about that when you are applying and putting that on your resume. All right, so let's move into behavioral interviewing, and this is the big one. So when you think about behavioral interviews, there's a lot of things that you can do to ensure that you are not only putting your best foot forward, but that you are well prepared for any potential questions that you may get asked during that behavioral interview. So let's talk about some of the things that you can do to prepare for the interview. I will share with you that although I'm not only in a talent acquisition role, I also do this for myself. I have a spreadsheet. So if I'm applying to a role and I'm looking for a promotion within Wells Fargo, I have an Excel spreadsheet where I have tabs and I list examples of times that I've consulted, provided great customer service, challenges, obstacles, so that I can remember those. Because sometimes in an interview, nerves get in the way and we start thinking and we're like, oh, I can't think of an example. So as you prepare, I would challenge you, create a spreadsheet. It doesn't have to be too complex. That spreadsheet will grow as your experience grows, but prompt yourself to think of things that you want to prepare for that interview. So I want you to think of two things that you're going to prepare. You're going to do research, and then you're going to do a self-assessment. Applying and interviewing for a job is a two-way street. You want to make sure that when you're applying for a job, that you have researched the company. You've looked to make sure that you understand the company's reputation, the company's values. Do they align with what you are applying and what you want to look for? Maybe you want to kind of do some research on their early talent programs. What does that mean? Does that mean that you're going to have to relocate? Does it mean that you have to, commit to a particular market? Make sure that you're doing that due diligence so that you're not going in blind. And then in the interview, you're like, oh, I didn't know this position was going to require me to be in Charlotte for 6 months. Or I didn't know that the company's benefits don't kick in until after 6 months. So those are things that are going to be very relevant and will help you prepare the questions that you're going to ask in that interview. And then you also want to do a self-assessment, right? You want to make sure that you kind of look at, okay, this is the job description. These are the skills they're looking for. Do I have those skills? And how am I best going to present those skills in an interview? So this is where my Excel spreadsheet comes in. You can jot down, okay, they're looking for critical thinking skills. Okay, let me think about, when did I use critical thinking skills? Was it during a project? Was it a class? Was it maybe a volunteer campaign that I worked on and I was responsible for creating marketing materials? So really think of when you had to use those critical thinking skills, those problem solving skills. Those are all going to come into play as you do your self-assessment to kind of think, okay, this is what they're looking for. Yes, I have it. And this is how I'm going to present it in an interview. So that will help you really align your goals to what the position that you're applying to, right? You also don't want to apply to a position and go, well, I'm only applying because, I just really haven't seen a lot of opportunities. And I'm just going to get my foot in the door. Yes, it is okay to get your foot in the door. It depends on what you do once you get your foot in the door. But if you're just applying just for the sake of going through the process of, let me just see what's out there, and it doesn't necessarily mesh with your career goals, that's going to come across to the recruiter, because as the recruiter is really looking at what your motivation, what your intent is, that comes across in how you respond to questions, how you sell yourself, your energy. All that is very important. Now, as you do your company research, the one thing that I want you to make sure that you don't do is don't memorize data on that website. Many times you're like, okay, I got to remember numbers. I want to make sure I'm quantifying my examples. Yes, you want to quantify your examples, but you also don't want to just regurgitate information that is quickly just Googled or quickly seen on the website. Really find one or two areas of that company that resonate with you and really kind of think about, okay, I'm going to ask about this. So maybe you've looked at the company and you've looked at their approach to community involvement, or perhaps their research in a particular area. Or maybe you're really interested in working in a particular line of business and you've read up on that business and how they're growing, what they've done, what clients they service. Those are things that you're really jazzed about. That's going to come across in your interview, and that's going to help you create some questions that you want to ask as you get to the end of your interview. So make sure that you do that. I'm going to emphasize, I'm going to say it now, and I'm going to probably say it again as we get closer to the end. You want to make sure that you are thinking about 5 to 7, sometimes even 10 questions that you could potentially ask. Throughout the interview, a recruiter has a process of a tell and sell. So we tell you about the role, we sell you on the company. So many times we've already addressed some questions that you might be thinking, right? So maybe I've already told you about the training. Maybe I already told you about our timeline to make decisions. And you get to the very end and you're like, ooh, I was going to ask that. I probably should have thought of more questions to ask. So make sure that you do that, because interviewing is a two-way street, and you want to make sure that the role fits and that you know what you're going to ask when you get into that interview. So I can't stress it enough. Do your research. All right, let's go on to the next slide. So as you think about making sure that you're doing an engaging interview, I want you to think about, yes, we are in a virtual environment, and your interview should not be very different from what an in-person interview was, okay? So you're still wanting to make sure that you are having eye contact, that you're aware of your body language. We all have nervous energy, so make sure you take a deep breath, and that you make sure that take a deep breath before you answer. That's going to help you kind of remember, okay, let me center myself, smile. Make sure that you're looking at the camera. If you were interviewing in person, you would have eye contact. You would be talking to the person. You would be nodding. So sometimes when it's in a virtual environment, we might be, almost too comfortable and looking down, maybe jittery, maybe grabbing something in the background. So there's a lot of things that don't convey confidence, and your body language definitely can come across in that interview. So make sure that you are thinking of those things when you are doing an interview. Now, if there is more than one individual that's in that group interview as a panel, then make sure that you're not only just looking at the person who asked the question, right? So make sure that you are looking at both individuals. Now, virtually, it's a little different because you're like, where do I look? Now, here's the thing. You're going to want to look directly into the camera, not at the small video that maybe is showing the panel of individuals that are on that call. So don't look around, don't look up, don't get nervous. That all comes across as jittery. Now, the recruiter's there to help you, right? We want to get you comfortable, but don't get too relaxed. I will tell you, as an interviewer, I will work to, get the individual comfortable. And I know they're nervous because it's an interview. But one of the things that you can do is practice on how you're going to greet those individuals that are going to interview you. Ask, how's your day going? If you practice your greeting, if you practice what questions you're going to ask, that will come across as showing as you're calm, confident. And I will tell you, if you get ahead of those questions, that's going to calm your nerves as well. So by this point, you've done all your homework, you've gone to the website, you've looked at articles, you've done your due diligence, and you have a plan of attack of what questions you're going to ask. You've reviewed them against your skill sets, and you know the job description. So be confident. There's a lot of things that you can do to prepare ahead of time that is going to show not only that you're curious, but that you have definitely prepared for this interview and that you want the job. Now, at the bottom of this slide, I've included some things that you should avoid. So as you recall, I mentioned don't memorize data from the website. So they can easily be Googled. That person's like, okay, that was the first sentence out of our job posting, or that was the first thing that was on Google that you looked up very quickly. Ask about information that resonates with you, right? So if you are asking about the timeline of training, what does that look like? What does a successful candidate in this role look like? What are the skill sets that you think would definitely set others apart? Definitely, you can still ask, by when are you making decisions? But likely the recruiter's already told you. So make sure that I emphasize again, have 5 to 7, sometimes even 10 questions that you might ask, because you're going to get to the end and you're going to be like, oh boy, the recruiter just talked about everything. I was going to ask about relocation, they covered it. I was going to ask about training, they covered it. So you have to make sure you have backups. And when you have backup questions, guess what? You go into that interview confident, knowing that, okay, I've prepared, I've got questions that not only show thoughtfulness, that have shown that my homework, and that really show a true interest, right? So make sure that their questions, don't make the questions overly hard. I've had questions that sometimes, students want to talk about, maybe quantitative analysis. Guess what, guys? I'm a recruiter. I'm not going to go into that. And I'm like, you know what? I have no idea. Great question to ask the hiring manager. So think of appropriate questions to ask, and that's going to show that you've done your homework. So virtual interviewing. So as I prepared for this presentation today, I had to think about my background. Do I have an ether cord? What's my bandwidth? And am I going to have a strong connection? I know all of you have been interacting through social distancing through Zoom, and you're probably kind of have way too many Zoom calls a day. But an interview, you need to prepare and determine, how do you come across? So maybe you record yourself, maybe you listen to how you come across, maybe you actually have individuals do mock interviews with you so that you can get comfortable kind of doing a video call, right? So sometimes we've all done Zoom calls with friends, but we're relaxed, there's nothing for you. You're like, oh, I've done Zoom calls plenty of times, I've got this under my belt. Well, an interview is completely different. In an interview, you want to make sure that you're keeping it professional, you're aware of your background. If you maybe perhaps have roommates, you don't live alone, make sure that they know that you're interviewing so that you don't have some random person walking back and forth behind you, walking in on you. Maybe you have a dog, so make sure that maybe you ask somebody to take your dog for a walk so they're not barking in the background. There are things that you certainly can control in a virtual interview. So distractions are very important, that you remove those distractions. So when you remove everything that you can control, that's going to alleviate some nerves. Okay, you've planned for this, you have some scenarios, you have a backup plan. Sometimes also asking the recruiter, just in case we get disconnected, is there a phone number I should call in? And if that happens, don't get frazzled, because yes, sometimes we know, your Wi-Fi goes down and all of a sudden you've lost the connection and you're like, oh my gosh, what's happening? So that unfortunately can, really throw someone off when they're doing an interview. So ask the recruiter, if for any reason I get disconnected, is there a phone number I can call you at, or text you, what's our plan B in case we lose connectivity? And that happens. That unfortunately is kind of a reality of 2020. So know that recruiters plan for it. They know it happens. It's not a reflection of you. It's just what's going on in 2020. All right. So the other piece that I would tell you is, don't be too nervous about the uncomfortable silence in a Zoom call. So in an in-person interview, you would be able to see when someone's looking down and writing notes, or maybe perhaps they're grabbing something from their desk. In a Zoom call, you're only seeing that person's face. You may not see them typing. Maybe they're typing their notes. Maybe they're looking down because they're typing their notes. Maybe they're jotting down notes. Maybe you're a fast talker. I know I'm a fast talker. So maybe they're trying to jot down all the information you've just given them. So it's okay to have a little bit of silence and be comfortable with that. Now, if you notice that there's constant silence, then you can definitely ask, is there any additional information that I can offer? Many times the recruiter will have the follow-up questions, so you don't have to worry about adding additional details. They'll let you know if they need additional information. Now, here's the key on how to know that you had a really impactful answer. We're going to walk through and talk about the STAR method. So all of you are familiar and aware of what the STAR method are. You could probably Google, there's tons of YouTube videos. Wells Fargo and many companies use the STAR method. And basically the STAR method is situation or task, action or result. So it's a very kind of check in a way for you to actually prepare for the interview. Now here's one key tip that I will share with you. A behavioral interview can be deceiving when you think, well, I gave them what the situation was. The customer wasn't happy. I processed the return and they left happy. Yep, you told me what the situation, the action, and the result. Very transactional. Boom, boom, boom. Well, you may think, well, I gave them what they wanted to hear, but in an interview process, you want to make sure that you're also thinking about what are the critical thinking skills, right? Did I check the company policy to see what the return was? Did I, calm the customer down? Did I remember the customer as a frequent customer and welcome them back? Did I thank them? Did I offer them options? Did I let them know, gosh, you don't have a receipt, here are the options that I have? So now in your response, you're not only showing critical thinking skills, you're showing that you have a respect for the company's policy and procedures. So you're following procedure, you are greeting your customer, you're thanking them for coming back, and you're obviously ensuring that you are a good ambassador and steward of your company brand. So when you look at YouTube videos, I really want you to think about the STAR method is a behavioral interview, but don't make your interview transactional. That's the key thing that sets a student apart from others, is how you respond to the STAR method. So you'll see on the appendix that we've actually added some job seeker resources where you can see videos, you can see examples, you can go to YouTube, you can definitely jot down examples of STAR method. But I want to make sure that you don't make it a transaction and just check off the box and tell me what the situation, the action, the results. I want to make sure that you're showing your critical thinking skills, because that's what's going to make sure that sets you apart. All right, so let's go and think about your elevator speech. So you may be thinking, gosh, interviews are so nerve-wracking. I don't know what they're going to ask me. Well, all of you know the answer to what's likely going to be the first question in an interview, and that's tell me about yourself. So that's your elevator speech. All of you are experts in you, right? No one knows you better than you. Maybe perhaps your parents, but no one can sell yourself better than you. So make sure that you practice that elevator speech. So when that person says to you, tell me about yourself and why are you interested in this role? Avoid kind of the personal things like, well, I love to cook, I love to travel, I love gaming. Make sure that the tell me about self includes skills that correlate to the job, goals that you want to achieve, that want to make sure that actually connect to the role, right? So if you have a passion for project management, you have a passion for programming, make sure that that comes across in your elevator speech. Very, very quick way to do that is making sure that you practice. The more you practice, then the better your elevator speech is going to come across, and the better you're going to sell and set up that interview, because that's going to be the kickoff for your interview, and you want to make sure that you are successful in doing that. All right, so we've covered a lot of information, and we're now at the closing of the interview, right? So this is where you are going to be asking questions. You're going to be asking the interview if there's any additional information that you can share. And then it's also going to be an opportunity for you to summarize your skills and ask for the job, right? So tell that person, here's why I think I would be the best person for this role and why you should select me. If you have additional questions, please feel free to reach out to me. Is there any information that you would find helpful? So that individual not only knows you have a strong desire for the role, but also knows that you have prepared, you've asked the thoughtful questions, and you have a strong close. So we want you to start strong, and then we want you to also close very strong as well. All right, guys, so I know we covered a lot of information, and I know as you prepare and plan for this, we want you to make sure you use our resources. So join our talent community, make sure that you're looking at our job seeker resources. I want to encourage you all to reach out to me on LinkedIn for additional questions. We know you can do this, so good luck when you get out there and get ready to prepare. We want to thank our conference sponsors, Wells Fargo and Lilly Endowment Foundation, for having me today. Good luck, everyone.
Awesome day. Thank you all so much for tuning in to the virtual 2020 Collegiate 100 conference. We hope that you received all of this valuable information. And please stand by for an important message from Chairman Thomas W. Dortch, Jr.
Thank you for joining us for day one of our virtual Collegiate 100 conference. We hope you've enjoyed the sessions on today. So get ready for more on tomorrow. A very special thank you goes out to the Lilly Endowment for making this all possible. Last year, we partnered with the Lilly Endowment for our inaugural Collegiate 100 conference. And this year, we hope we exceed all expectations. Thank you for joining us, and we hope you will get the most out of these sessions.